webcast is on. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee here at Maidstone Town Hall on Wednesday the 23rd of June 2021. I'm Councillor David Burton and I'm the chairman of this committee. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Can I start by asking if anybody else would be meaning to record? And I'm asking not to prevent you, just so that others are aware. No one's indicating. Those that might be using Skype tonight, I would advise you, as a connection into the meeting, visiting members or so on, I would advise you that the instant messaging would be visible and would be recorded also for playback. But that's just to advise you. I'd like to also remind members that they should only address the meeting by using the microphones, and I would request that they're turned off when you finish speaking. The webcast will only pick up sound that comes directly from the microphones, and what is said into the microphone will be recorded. I think we're all aware that there is a one-way system in the chamber, and that if we do need to move around, that we use the main staircase when coming up to the chamber, and that we will exit via Committee Room B. We're not anticipating any fire alarms this evening, so should we hear such a thing, please consider it to be the real event and follow the instructions of the Democratic Services Officer who is sat to my right. And so we'll start with apologies at agenda item 1. I have received apologies from Councillors Mrs Bryce and Councillors Mrs Parfitt-Reid, and I don't believe there's any others this evening. Which takes us nicely into agenda item 2, substitute members, and I see that we have Councillor Pearl.
Yes, Jonathan Pearl for Councillor Parfitt-Reid.
Thank you. And also
Councillor Patrick Orton for Louise Bryce.
Thank you. And now we move to agenda item 3, which is the election of the vice chairman of this committee. And from the chair, I would nominate Councillor Perry. Are there any other nominations? So I should have asked, I think there was a seconder for Councillor Perry, Councillor Mrs Ring. Are there any other nominations, please? I'm not seeing any other nominations. Therefore, that is uncontested, and Councillor Perry will be the vice chair of this committee for the forthcoming municipal year. Agenda item 4, urgent items. There are no urgent items this evening. With your agreement, members, I wonder whether it would be prudent to alter the running order of the agenda slightly, in so much as it may be wise to take the reference for from Licensing Committee, which is item 16 before item 15. And similarly, I wonder whether it would be useful to us to take the reference from Strategic Planning Committee, which is item 20, ahead of item 19. So if you're all content, we will proceed in that order. Thank you. Item 5, visiting members. Can I just check with the clerk? Do we want visiting members to come to the table and announce themselves? Okay, so what I would ask then is that visiting members would come to the table and just announce themselves as a record for the meeting, please.
Hello, Councillor Janetta Sams.
And Councillor Tom Sams.
Thank you, Councillors Sams. Both are noted as visiting members. Are there any items in particular that you wish to speak to?
Yes, item 18, please.
Item 18.
And me, please, as well. Thank you.
Both on 18. Sorry, I'm just getting used to the idea of it's almost somebody sitting behind you at the pantomime here with them. So, Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, Councillor Cooper, and I intend to speak on item number 20 on the agenda.
Thank you.
Councillor Nagy, and I'd just like to speak on any items if I indicate, if that's all right.
Your right is reserved. No others. Item 6, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures, please? Councillor Kimmants indicating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 15 and 16, I do believe they are. I hold a Hackney Carriage driver's licence, a private hire driver's licence, a private hire vehicle licence and an operator's licence in Maidstone. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure your expertise will be most welcome in that regard later. Members generally, to assist me with the meeting, would you indicate by standing your name cards upright, preferably at the outer edge of your desk so that I can spot them in amongst the screens? So I think that's Councillor Khadkar indicating. Oh, just practicing. Yeah, well, the system works. Excellent. So we've covered disclosures, and other than that one, noted, no others. Similarly, at item 7, can we take a note of disclosures of lobbying, please? Have any members been lobbied? I would note for the record that I've been lobbied in the matters that relate to the local plan, which I think tonight would be the update on Heathlands. Are there any other? Councillor Mrs Blackmore.
I've been lobbied about item 18.
Yeah, same one. Any others? Councillor Garton, is that for the same item?
No, the referral from the licensing committee. I was member of the licensing committee, and at the time I was lobbied by.
You were lobbied in relation to that. Okay. Councillor Perry.
Yes, I've been lobbied on item 18. Thank you.
Okay, walking round to the side of the room. Councillor English, I think you were indicated by hand there.
Yes, I was lobbied on item 18, and previously at the time of the discussion at Strategic Planning Committee on the reference, originally I was lobbied at that point.
Okay. Councillor Ms Hasty.
I may have been lobbied on item 18, I'm just saying, just in case.
Okay. I don't see any other notifications of lobbying, so that's all duly noted. Thank you, members. Okay. I think the legal officer would like to address us via the webcam. Please go ahead.
Hello, good evening. Good evening, members. Good evening, Chair. It's just regarding the declaration by Councillor Kimmants about the Hackney driving licence. In line with the Code of Conduct, I am granting a dispensation to enable Councillor Kimmants to participate in this meeting. So just for noting, please.
Thank you for advising us of that. There are a couple of puzzled faces in relation to that. I don't think any of us have a problem with it in any way, but does there need to be any explanation of the dispensation? I would imagine it goes to the extent that Councillor Kimmants is no more affected in the interest than the rest of us.
It's just for the avoidance of doubt in terms of the granting of the licence, and if the council is involved in any way in terms of granting the licence or enforcement measures, if there is, it may amount to other significant interest within the Code of Conduct. And so for the avoidance of doubt, the dispensation is being granted.
Right.
Because I think the interest really isn't significant, but it's for the avoidance of doubt. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So thank you for that clarification. And as I said earlier, I imagine that the expertise contained will be useful to us anyway. Okay. No indications. We're 8, yes. Yeah. Item 8. I propose that all items being taken in public this evening, unless any member does indicate that they wish to speak on item 21, the minutes that were in part 2 attached to the agenda. Lots of shakings of heads. So, Councillor Mrs Hastie?
I had a question about that item, but it doesn't need to go into any detail.
So that will be as part of taking the minutes in a moment.
Yeah.
Right, so I propose that all items will be taken in public, but we can reserve that decision should the need arise. Thank you. So accordingly, at item 9, I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of March 2021, including those in part 2, be agreed as a correct record. Does anybody wish to question the accuracy of the committee, of the minutes? So I will assume this to be agreed and I will sign those later. Thank you, members. Item 10, there are no petitions this evening, but item 11, which is questions and answers for members of the public, I have been advised that there are 4 questions that have been submitted, and we could start with Miss Duff, please. Ms. Duff, are you with us on the webcast, please? We'll move, okay. There perhaps is a difficulty connecting there, so shall we move on to the next question and come back as the need may arise? Mr. Healy, are you with us, please?
Chairman, can I just ask before the gentleman comes up? Normally, we would have the name of the person who's asking the question and what order
Is your microphone on?
Oh, sorry. Well, it says it is.
It is. Right, okay.
Yeah, sorry. Normally, we have the names of the people that are asking the questions and what order they're going into. Because we could forget the people's name and then we've got nothing. So can we go back to having their names put on beside their questions, please?
Okay. Yes, we'll see if we can organise that a little better in
you.
future. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Ring. So, can I assume that we still don't have Miss Duff with us?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Ah, we can hear you now.
You can, lovely, thank you. Right, this is regarding the Heathlands development. Do you think it right? A third iteration master plan has been completed and submitted by this council in March, but directly affected residents who continue to find their homes and land in the centre of the development site have been denied access to the updated plan to see how it affects their properties.
Thank you for your question. I can tell you that plan that you refer to is a draft and is not a final iteration. And it's because it's in draft that it hasn't been released. But I can give you the undertaking that a refined version, as and when it is published, will be made fully available. Do you have a supplementary question arising out of that?
Hello?
Hello?
I couldn't, if you'd made a reply there. I did ask my question. I haven't heard the reply. I don't know whether you actually made a reply, but I didn't hear it.
Okay, I'm being asked to repeat the answer. Since
Thank you very much.
it wasn't a written answer, I'll do my best to repeat it in the same way. So what I was saying is that the document that you're referring to was a draft, is still a draft,
Right.
and that's why it hadn't been published. But I can promise you that if and when it moves to something more that is not draft, it will be fully shared with residents for comment and consultation, and we will welcome input. And then I asked you if you had a supplementary question arising from that.
I do have, yeah, it was related to that. The 18 landowners who have purposefully been obliged of their demands to have their land removed from the master plan, given that never gave permission for it to be included in the first place, have received any formal notification from the council, even that they were told by your lawyers that they would expect to see the new master plan by the end of March. You've just explained that, but they have had no formal notification from the council one way or the other to know whether they are actually included in the Heathlands plan still. So they would like to be treated, if possible, with respect and decency. Are you going to be able to honour that promise?
So I think you do actually stretch the boundaries a little bit of necessarily arising out of the original question, but I think it would be reasonable to anticipate that anybody involved in the in a current draft would be fully consulted currently. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Now we could move to Mr. Healy, please. Just checking, Mr. Healy, are you with us yet? I think we may need to move on to another questioner, which would be Miss Kane.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we have you loud and clear.
Yes. That's great. Can you please confirm how much money has been spent by Maidstone Council and Homes England on this council-led garden community project so far?
Again, thank you for your question. At the latest tally, I can tell you that Maidstone's expenditure amounts to £524,642. We do not have the information for the equivalent information from Homes England, and you would need to address that request directly to them. Do you have a supplementary question, please?
Yes, I do, yes. You told the Downs Mail in May that the new administration would ensure tighter control on public money. How are you going to apply tighter financial control to the Heathland project, given ultimately the council and Homes England are acting as promoter for 8 private landowners who could ably take financial risks to promote their own land, like every other landowner in the borough?
Apologise for perhaps not entirely understanding the thrust of your question, but if you're looking for assurance that the members of this council will be diligent in monitoring all expenditure, whether it relates to this project at Heathlands or any other matter of the council, then I feel sure on behalf of the 55 I can give you that assurance that we will indeed exercise the utmost care with the money. as regards the Homes England element, wherever those figures are disclosed to us in detail, again, we will take due interest, but I cannot answer directly for their measures of control. Thank you for that question. Are we able to return to Mr. Healy at this stage? And if not, perhaps we could come to the fourth question, which is Ms. Hammond. Do we have either of Ms. Hammond or Mr. Healy?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we do have you, Ms. Hammond.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, my question is, the report on the council-led Heathlands Garden community mentions the council are now going to engage using taxpayers' money, a PR company, to help with community engagement. Does the chairman feel the council has done a good job on community engagement to date?
I'm going to start this slightly reverse by saying, of course, we can always do better. But these are difficult matters. They are difficult matters to broach with residents. I think honest endeavours to communicate throughout have been made, and we will always try and do better in the future. Is there a supplementary question, please?
Yes, please. The fact of the matter is that MBC have treated residents, the parish council and even our local councillors with contempt in relation to this project over the last 2 years. Mounting a charm offensive now will not overcompensate for bad planning decisions of the past. Is it time to finally call a day on this very sorry project and learn the lessons to not make a costly mistake again?
I apologise because the quality of the sound wasn't excellent, it wasn't good and was muffled in places. But I can only reiterate that...
Would you like me to reread?
I'm actually going to say yes, because I did not hear the full content of it. Please do.
Okay, no problem whatsoever. Okay, my supplementary question is, the fact of the matter is that MBC have treated residents, the parish council and even our local councillors with contempt in relation to this project over the last 2 years. Mounting a charm offensive now will not overcompensate for bad planning decisions of the past. Is it time to finally call a day on this very sorry project and learn the lessons to not make such a costly mistake again?
I'm not going to comment on the opinion that you are expressing, but I can certainly tell you that, certainly in my direct experience, some of those parties that you refer to have had full opportunity to engage in the process as democratically elected representatives and continue to do so. Thank you for your questions. I will have one final attempt to see if Mr. Healy has managed to join us. Doesn't look like it.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt. It's Kate Hammond again. Is it possible for me to read his question?
Yes, I will allow that discretion. Please do.
Thank you so much. This question is, this committee is receiving an updated report on the Council's Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan tonight, as well as an update report on the Council-led garden community at Lenham Heath. Dumping over 4,000 homes in the Kent countryside is one of the furthest locations from the borough's urban centre. Creating an over-reliance on car travel is not conducive to reducing climate change and improving biodiversity. Can you tell me how the proposed Heathlands development relieves the Council's declared biodiversity and climate emergency? Relief, sorry.
Let me answer you in this way, and I can't speak on behalf of all members to bind them in any way, but I would suggest as to use the ineloquent descriptive of dumping over 4,000 homes. Were members of this council faced with a scheme that simply dumped 4,000 homes without consideration of these matters, I'm quite sure it would be rejected. If a scheme comes forward that is fully considerate of all matters, including biodiversity things, so we'll be interested in things like nutrient neutrality, the impact of travel, air quality, and all matters that you know, if a well thought out scheme is presented, it will be given due consideration. Do you have a supplementary question arising?
Yes, please. You told the Downs Mail in May that the derived concept...
I'm going to allow you to continue, though technically you can't because you're not the questioner, but it is a prepared question. It had been the same no matter what, so please continue.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, the supplementary is, you told the Downs Mail in May that the derided concept of model shift will be canned and that we will not pretend that model shift is a solution to overdevelopment. Will you accept Heathlands to be a predominantly car-based development in an unsustainable location which cannot be made sustainable simply by building a new railway station?
I think there are a great many assumptions about the merits or otherwise of a scheme that is not fully worked out and what they might be. I don't think modal shift is a magic solution for any of our transport woes. And I think modal shift is an outdated way of describing things, and we should be talking about travel choices. And it should be a positive opportunity to embrace alternatives to the car, whilst not relying entirely upon the car nor dismissing it as a viable transport for many of us into the future. So I think in essence, until there is detail, it's far too early to jump to conclusions. So I thank you for all of your questions this evening, and the question session is now closed. Members, can I ask you to cast your eye to item 13, the committee work programme. I don't know if any members wish to comment or if officers need to add to it. I guess a visiting member can technically come in on this if he reserved his rights on all items, Councillor Nagy.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm here tonight, members, to suggest something that this committee, I think, should cover in their work programme. And that item, I think, which is of great concern to the people of Maidstone, is I was wondering if in this coming year the committee could look into, if possible, that they have the power to stop taking people from London Borough Councils, as I know this is a great concern to a lot of people in Maidstone. And I think this is the committee that should be looking into this, because I think this is an unabstainable we just can't go on at this at the moment, and I think this is an item that could be on this programme. I don't know if it's the right committee, but this is the most powerful committee, and I was hoping this might be able to go onto the programme in this forthcoming year. But I'm sure you'll soon tell me.
I think you raise a matter that does vex us all, and the place for it would be the CHE committee, and we're fortunate enough to have the Vice Chair with us this evening, so perhaps he would nod to indicate that he's absorbed the matter of your suggestion, and that could be taken forward to agenda setting there for consideration. And Councillor Mrs Hastie.
Thank you. It was just in relation to the Part 2 item, which I'm not going to go into detail with, if there was any idea when it might be coming back as a report.
Sorry, didn't hear all that question.
So I think it was a question that relates to the yellow pages from the minutes, which was deferred from a previous meeting. I am aware of the item. It was before I took this chair. I am trying to understand the matter more fully. I am assured that there's no immediate urgency for it, but we will make sure it gets to committee as soon as possible.
Shall I go back there now?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
Right, so the work programme is duly noted. Item 14, reports from outside bodies. There are no reports this evening. And we're going to move to item 15 next, which is the referral from Licensing Committee. And I think this is going to be introduced remotely via Miss Hawkes. Okay. Or actually the suggestion is to take this item in conjunction with 16 and run them together. Members are agreed because of the overlap. Okay, so we'll consider this as item 15 and 16 together, and that way we might get a relevant introduction from officers. If you'd like to go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members. Since the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan was agreed by this committee in October last year, some good progress has been made. Almost all actions that were due to start have started, and the list of actions and the responsible officers is shown at Appendix A, along with a red, amber or green rating. And members will see that the vast majority of these actions are rated green, which is obviously what we would want to see. The report covers an awful lot, so I'll just pull out some of the key things referenced in the report that I think it's important for this committee to note. Firstly, there's been lots of work ongoing to ensure that the local plan contains the policies and elements we need to deliver our ambitions on climate change and biodiversity. As mentioned previously in the meeting, the licensing policy does not contain a date for taxi vehicles to have zero tailpipe emissions. And that has also had the knock-on effect of currently meaning we cannot progress the action linked to this on providing charging points, which is part of Action 1.8, quite in the way that we had planned based on the advice from the Energy Saving Trust on numbers of charging points required, etc. However, I think perhaps the wording in the report makes it sound as if we won't be doing anything at all on charging points for the taxi industry, which isn't the case. We know we need to understand the needs of the industry and the best way to provide what is required in a timely fashion in terms of charging points, and we'll continue to do that on an ongoing basis. The report makes reference to the Council's application for $452,000 in government funding from the Green Home Grants Local Authority Delivery Scheme, or in a bit of a shorter abbreviation, LAD2. Now, I'm very pleased to say that our application has been accepted, which is incredibly good news. This funding will provide help for low-income households in homes with poor energy efficiency and help us make our temporary accommodation more energy efficient. The Council has agreed to fund 3 natural flood management schemes that will be delivered by the South East Rivers Trust. These will be important to reduce flood risk and will also have wider social and environmental benefits. The Council has promoted and participated in No Mow May to increase pollinating flowers and help bees, butterflies and other wildlife. We identified 5 areas of Council land we would not mow for May, and we promoted No Mow May on social media. This was well received by the public, and certainly from a personal perspective, having seen this promoted on our social media, I participated in No Mow May for the first time. We have increased tree coverage on council land, but perhaps not as much as we would have liked, as we have been hampered to an extent by the issues around COVID safe working, and in particular the lack of availability of the type of older trees that we ideally need to plant in public areas. And the trees we plant in public areas do have to be older, really, to prevent them being easily vandalised. Officers from across the council are currently considering options around increasing tree planting, and a report will be taken to the August meeting of Communities, Housing and Environment Committee. Additionally, the Council is continuing to prepare our operational estate to work towards net zero carbon emissions. For example, we've drafted a vehicle replacement plan, and we're looking at the best way to provide the electric vehicle charging infrastructure that's required at the depot. And finally, this isn't in the report, but I'd like to let the committee know that Helen Miller, who's worked so hard on the strategy and action plan, is leaving the council next month. I'd like to thank her for all her hard work and wish her well in her new role. And just to let committee know, we're currently in the process of interviewing for her replacement. And Helen's here tonight for the final time to answer any questions from the committee on the plan. And thank you. I think that's all from me. And Helen and I will be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your introduction. Councillor Cox, I think you're the first to indicate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 2 points. One about No Mo May. I know we obviously put it out on social media and on various other things, but obviously it didn't get through to all residents because I had several in my inbox following the AGM, but actually furnished them with photographs very soon in June. But I do think once people get to realise this is what we're encouraging, then it's a good idea. So that was just to cover out that. No Mo May. When I actually spoke to a couple of Kent County councillors, they hadn't got a clue about it either, and yet some of the mowing is done, or a good amount is done by them. Also, can I refer the committee, and indeed Chairman possibly, to page 19 of Appendix A, 1.2. Are you going to be replacing the words modal shift with your travel choices? Because I think it's a very good opportunity to start as we mean to go on if we're changing the use of language here. So I would obviously support that. Thank you.
Well, I'll address that, and I welcome that support, but I think that that process needs to tear down through the revision of the integrated transport strategy. But I would strongly urge that wherever we can reconsider the use of modal shift. And since we've raised it, I would like to give some explanation to my logic. I think one of my colleagues across the way there identified modal shift as perhaps potentially the two most hated words in the English language at times. And I think that emanates from the fact that you start with modal and people haven't got a clue what you're on about. So it's simple to say travel, the way we travel. We don't need to make it techno, modal, travel. And then shift, there's the inference that you will be shifted, you will be forced. And I don't think that resides well with many people. If you're going to make me do something, I'm going to resist. But actually, if we give choices, genuine choices of good, reliable alternatives, there'll be more inclination to give it a try and maybe like it and maybe to achieve a benefit. But we're not forcing you away from your preferred means of transport. So I strongly urge that we use that language and that logic. I call it carrot, carrot and more carrot because the traditional modal shift is carrot and stick. The carrot is here's a bus. The shift is we will make parking so expensive or whatever the measure is to force you onto it. But I think carrot, carrot and more carrot and travel choice is the way forward. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to explain that a little more fully. Councillor English.
I don't disagree with you, Mr. Chairman. In another committee, in another place, when you put forward, and with other councillors across party, the view you put on on charging for electric vehicles, we very much took the same point. Offering people genuine choices is obviously the way to go. In terms of this strategy, may I say that it is pleasing to see most of it coming together. But the comments that Councillor Cox made are interesting because whilst we were all very proud of the No Mo initiative, there were a number of residents who actually rang up and said, why is the council not mowing verges anymore? So it is very important to get this message out because the number of people who think that the only way you can maintain land is by having it mowed to the sort of appearance of a billiard table is surprisingly high. So we need to get the message out so that people understand we're actually being proactive and not simply slacking on a job. And unfortunately, I did have a number of people contact me and say, why is the council not doing its job properly by mowing these places? So it is important we manage these messages and get out the positives. Having said that, there's an awful lot of positives coming through this programme. that we can identify and promote, but we do need to be proactive about doing that and not assume that people will automatically know we're doing the right thing.
I don't want to dominate this from the chair, but since we've mentioned the no-mo thing twice, and conceptually, what a good idea. But I do think, since we've run it this May, it is also worth an opportunity to review what it has meant in places. There are some very, very small pieces of land that, if they're allowed just to grow weedy, they look poor. And we do need pride in our borough. So I do think there needs to be something very selective about the areas that we do know may, and possibly a seeding regime that actually maximises the benefit so that we do get the diversity and not just bland grass. And there's another aspect that I think it contains an unintended consequence. And I was chatting with some of the guys at the depot about this week. When you've got long grass, it's very difficult to litter pick it. So the machines go storming through, perhaps at Moat Park, and turn 10 pieces of litter into 100 pieces of litter. So there are some unintended consequences to this that need to be thought about. The principle of it, I don't think there's any of us that don't want to support something that encourages wildlife, insect diversity, carbon capture, whatever level we want to look at it. But we do need to, at the same time, maintain something that is reasonable to look at and doesn't end up full of litter. So I don't know where that review should come from. Probably CHE, I would suggest. So if there do seem to be nods of agreement, we should just make that a formal reference to CHE to review lessons learned, shall we call it, from No Mo May. Is that agreed that is referred to them? Yeah, okay, thank you. Moving down the line, is that Councillor Kimments that's got his name plate up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, it's going to be about the taxis. It was good. I actually sat and listened to the meeting of the licensing committee, and it was nice that because of COVID, they actually kicked it into the long grass. I think it was Councillor Garton's idea, actually, listening to it. But I am getting to the stage where I'm slowing down anyway, and I'm doing more work as a councillor, so I'm not too worried. But there is guys out there that work in excess of 12 hours a day, some 7 days a week, that can't afford to move over to electric vehicles. I want to see that we don't rush into it. I want to make sure that we get enough electric charging points. I can't remember what the actual figure was, but you've got to remember there's like about 400 private hire vehicles and there's 50 hackney carriages. So that's, you know, simple, that's 450 charging points, isn't it? And because you're going to have to charge it at home, it's going to be 450 charging points, because you can't charge it during the day if you're working the vehicle during the day. If you live in a block of flats, you ain't going to be able to hang the flex out the window if you live on the 15th floor. So I think that we really need to think about this before we run into it and change it over, because what will actually happen is the private hire drivers will just say, well, sod Maidstone, let's go and licence ourselves over in Tunbridge and Malling, because a majority of the guys now are going over to Tunbridge and Malling, because for one, it's cheaper, it's easier to get their licence, and they can run their vehicles a lot longer. Thank you.
Number of issues tied up there. We are considering these two agenda items side by side. So since we've erred into the territory of the referral from licensing, is there anybody else that wants to specifically speak to that at this stage before I... Councillor Harper.
Yeah, picking up some of the points Councillor Kimmons just made, tie up, I think, to the whole issue around electric vehicles in a wider sense. So I think perhaps the issue is the ability to charge electric vehicles at home. I remember a lot of us who were on the council a couple of years ago, there was a workshop in the town hall looking at all the technology around home charging. And part of the problem is that if you live in a property with no off-street parking, you're reliant on parking your vehicle on the street and being able to charge, as Ashley just said, your vehicle when it's parked on the street. Now, the infrastructure for that currently is not available. I know the council itself has put in charging points in some of its, or in a lot of our car parks, but I know people who say that leaving their car parked in Lock Meadow or somewhere overnight, when your car costs, if you've got an electric vehicle, 20, 30, 40,000 pound or more, is a high risk to charge your vehicle a long way from where you live. And I mean, whilst I would support having electric taxis and as many electric vehicles as we can, I think part of our biodiversity strategy and climate change strategy needs to address urgently the issue of people being able to charge electric vehicles when they live in properties with no off-street parking. For those of us with off-street parking, it's a completely different issue, isn't it? But if you don't have off-street parking, you just, it's really difficult to see how electric vehicles would necessarily work for you. So I can see where the taxi drivers are, are coming from. If they're living in properties without off-street parking, we're in danger of putting them out of business.
So to go around order, Councillor Mumford, was it directly on this?
Yeah, I think so. I think if I've got it correctly, licensing were being asked was to come up with, that was given the opportunity of a date in 2022 or 2 dates in 2023, and they've just turned it back at us. That, let's say they took the second date, that will give the industry 7 years notice and us to get to a point where we're at 95% electric vehicles by 2030. I think it's 2036 when we're looking for 100%. And we're only looking at new vehicles. Now, some of the technology is not there, I understand that, but the cars it is. So, as we must consider that we've got to notify the industry of what we're doing so they can go along the path with us. We can't just stop and say, right, no, we're not going to do it now. We've also got to be able to plan the EV charging points, and we will be providing some of those. So we have got to start at some point, and we're only talking about new vehicles, we're only talking about cars at the moment. We've got to give the industry an indication of where we're going to end up in 2030, which is 95% of all of them will be electric vehicles. And we've got to plan the EV for that, and we must, whatever is decided tonight, is go forward with this and indicate what we are going to do.
So I think the sentiment that we're picking up there is we don't want this just to be parked, no pun intended, as we can't do it, but we need to actually have a declaration of what is possible now and the assurance that we're moving towards that. Councillor Nagy, as visiting member, you're wanting to come in on this? And you must go to the microphone if you wish to do so.
I've been moved to speak because obviously I'm on the licensing committee and this came before us, and we're not against biodiversity, climate change or anything like that. And I think what I'm hoping to see here tonight is that obviously recommendations can come from biodiversity and climate change, but when it comes to taxis, it's the licensing committee that deal with taxis. Because you've got to remember, whatever decisions we make at licensing can affect their livelihoods. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do biodiversity and green things and all them sort of things, but it's up to the licensing committee to make those changes because we will ask the industry what they think of these things. And I would ask members to remember that when the Licence Committee do make a decision on something, we affect their livelihoods. And that's how I'm asking you to think of it tonight. And all we were saying as a committee, and I think other members would bear me out on it, is that when it comes to taxi drivers and that side of it, if they could just suggest things, what they would like to see from the taxi trade, that goes to the licensing committee, then that licensing committee comes back with its recommendations from that, if I've said that the right way around. Because obviously I've seen some decisions made, and next day the licensing people or the taxi drivers say, oh, this is going to cost us money. So what I'm trying to say is that this is why it came back from the licensing committee. We're not against biodiversity. All we're saying is that when it comes to affecting the livelihoods of the taxi trade, it should be the licensing committee that makes that decision in the end, because we will look into it and make an informed decision with the industry. And something like this that just comes down and you have to do it, we could finish all the taxi drivers if we don't get this right. Thank you.
I think as members we all had the opportunity to buy into or speak against the climate change biodiversity strategy and plan. This could be Councillor Burton's soapbox night, but I do actually think that we're staring down the wrong end of the telescope on some of this. You know, if you actually look at the predictions associated to the future cost of motoring in the longer term, it's predicted that it will fall to 1/3 of what it is now. Now, some of that is achieved through other means, but you know, if you consider electric vehicles, I'm sure if we said to Councillor Kimmins, what's your biggest cost when you're running a Hackney cab? After the cost of the man in the seat, I suspect he's going to say diesel. Well, electric is a hell of a lot cheaper, mile for mile. And then I'd say to Councillor Kimmins, forgive me for putting words in your mouth here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what's your next big cost? You'd probably say servicing and maintenance. There ain't much servicing on an electric motor. You know, I've been running mine for what? This is a car, not a taxi. 4 or 5 years. You know, it has not once needed an oil change, a new air filter, a new oil filter, or new spark plugs. They don't. So actually, at the end of this, there's a much lower cost base on the horizon. And then I think when we talk about the charging infrastructure, yes, we do need to get the charging infrastructure right, but for goodness sake, let's know what we're on about. And what you need to support a fleet of, say, taxis are rapid chargers. 80% of the battery charged in 20 minutes. It doesn't need to be the preoccupation with I must have an extension lead hanging out of my upstairs flat down to the communal parking. It's different. And that's before the technology gets really exciting, when the car will go off and drive itself to a charging point. Now, you think I'm a nutter when I say things like that, but that is a lot closer than we think, and sadly, at that point, well, then the taxi drivers do get really upset, but we'll save that for 2040 when it happens. Moving round, Councillor Mrs. Ring.
I'd just like to pick up on, one was David's. What's charging points got to do with licence? I don't understand that bit. And the second thing is, me and my husband was having this conversation the other day. He reckons our car's going to last 18 months at the most. He said what puts him off going, he's got to get an electric one. Now, if he gets an electric one, do we pay $2,500, because your landlord won't put it up for you, for us to get a charger? My nearest one, I think, is Moat Park. So what I'm trying to say is, I know it's their businesses, and I'm not disputing that, but for councillors to come along begging, we knew this was happening. I get this every time I put the news on. Something else is going to change. Climate change going to happen here. So all I'm saying is, can we have just a little bit of, hang on, where are we going with this? Because we have got chargers in the town. You can buy them for 2,000, I think it was 2,300. So you can get them on your drive or in your garage. And as I say, if anybody's giving out money, if they'd like to give me some, I'd like some towards my charger at my house. Because I've got a decision to make, like most families have. So that's what I'm saying. It'd sound better if we said we're working together and not pulling them out and running their businesses for them. Thank you. Sorry, Chairman. It's just a...
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Ring. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I was just coming back to the working paper 15, and the recommendation seemed to be, maybe I misunderstood it, but it seemed to be quite simple to me, because it just says that the committee consider the requests from the licensing committee, happy to do that, to consult the licensing committee, that's what I thought we would always do anyway, on any biodiversity and climate change matter that falls within the remit of that committee. Well, yeah, that's common sense to me. I can't see what the problem is, so I don't really have a problem with that working paper. Just coming back to the agenda item 16, and it comes as no surprise, Chairman, I totally support what you said about modal shift and trouble choice. I think that's a very good choice, a good set of words, actually. And I was just looking at 2.4, because what I don't like, and maybe I'm an old-fashioned petrol head when it comes to this, I don't like the anti-car indication here. And it seems to say, and 2.4 on page 14 says, to support the shift from cars to active and mass transport. Well, I'm happy with active and mass transport. That is right. But some people do need cars, and they eventually will be electric cars. Either they may be disabled, they can't, or they've got young children, or they're elderly, and they live in a rural area like I do. It's not just necessarily in the rural area, it can be anywhere in the borough. Some people do need cars. So this idea somehow the shift from cars, I'm sorry, I don't buy that, and I don't like the words. And I would like, if that is going to be a theme, then I would like those words taken out. So it just reads to support active and mass transport and enable the transformation from fossil fuels to no tailpipe emission. Very practical and absolutely correct. I'm happy with all of that, but I would like that changed. The other thing I was on, when I was reading this, I got a bit confused on page 21 of the paper. You've got the heading transport, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with transport underneath it. So I think that must be a mistake. But it's only a nitpicking point. But well, I think someone may need to just look at that bit of drafting. That's all. But I would, in 2.4, like the shift from cars to taken out. So I think the important point is active transport, which I think is important, and also the move from fossil fuels to alternatives. And I think that they're the important points. Thank you.
I don't think our main objective today is to revise the plan and the strategy. So I think, Councillor Perry, we can take those thoughts forward to the next iteration where we want to correct wording. But nonetheless, points well made. Councillor Garton, I think you're next on my loop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I wholly agree with the points just raised by Councillor Perry. With regards to the taxis, if I may quickly get back to the licensing committee. There was cited a shortage of charging points, and again, as Councillor Perry pointed out, the paragraph 2.4, the final line then saying, we will not progress the related action on providing charging points. That's exactly counterproductive. We need to get the charging points first before we can look at providing or requesting electric cars for the trade. The next point was the reach of vehicles was mentioned by the taxi drivers, particularly with regards to airport runs, etc. And most importantly, availability of the right vehicles for the trade. And Councillor Mumford said earlier, we need to notify the industry. Unfortunately, it's not the industry of the taxi drivers, but the industry of motor manufacturers needs to provide the right tools to the taxi trade. And finally, we also had the impact of COVID being mentioned as an impact on the taxi drivers industry in Maidstone, and that taxi drivers have been struggling financially very much over the last 16 months. And for that reason, we just felt at the licensing committee that our hands were tied, because we had this task of making Maidstone all green and bio-friendly and carbon-friendly, etc. But at the same time, we have the taxi drivers who just neither have the tools, nor the infrastructure, nor the financial means to actually immediately relate to our plans and provisions. And that's why we were then leading towards a delay of it. And it's this counteraction between the licensing committee trying to do good in conjunction with the local, the borough's policies, versus the taxi drivers associations, who could just not simply, wouldn't have the tools to do that. That was why we brought this thing or requested the P&R committee to have another look at it. Bottom line is, as the local authority, we want to encourage good business, not stifle our trade in Maidstone. That's basically just for clarification on the previous points raised.
Councillor Cook, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to be brief because some of the points I wanted to make have already been made. But broadly speaking, I think the process towards travel choices is a good one, and I think the strategy is appropriate for the borough to work on. I think inevitably we are going to be faced with a situation where fossil-fueled vehicles are going to become less and less and less. And really what we're talking about here is providing the infrastructure to allow that to happen in a coordinated and appropriate way. Quite frankly, we're going to see electric buses on the roads before very long, and I think that's to be welcome. Taxis are a vital part of the a local community's services in terms of helping to get people from A to B, not least of which it includes many children, getting them to school as well, which the taxis work on. So I think that we need to have some degree of flexibility in this, and I agree with my colleague Councillor Perry in terms of this is not an issue of being anti-car. It's being pro-progress, and the progress is not anti-car, but it's anti-carbon. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Kimmons has indicated, I just wonder whether he can contribute at this point that might be relevant on taxis.
In actual fact, no, I was just picking up on what Councillor Cook said. We used to have a really decent electric bus service in this town, but then the council got rid of it.
I think Councillor Cook also used the word progress, but we'll move on. Councillor Mrs Blackmore.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I think a lot of the input has been useful and relevant, I would like to propose that we note the report.
How succinct. Councillor Kimmons, are you agreeing with that? Councillor English did indicate a while back, is it a small point to help us in noting?
It's just that technically I'm not sure that noting the report is quite right, because we actually, don't we need to decide on item 15 whether or not we actually think licensing committee should be consulted? Sorry, yeah. Because it asked us to consider the issue, so don't we actually have to come to a conclusion? So noting the report
I think we
wouldn't-
do, and there might be one or two finer points on the action plan as well. But well, shall we try and wrap up the taxi one? Are you moving something to that effect, Councillor English?
Yes, I'm like Councillor Perry. I don't see any reason why we can't adopt that approach, because it will help us going forward to have a joined-up plan, if that is actually how that's
Right.
done.
Forgive me, Councillor Black, is that what you meant when you were trying to sum that one up? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think everybody here has appreciated the comments that have come from the licensing committee. If they can be added on as an additional point within the action plan, essentially this report is for noting.
Okay.
I don't see anything within this that says we are looking to make major changes, major amendments. Would it not be better to have this brought back in, I don't know, another 3 months' time, when we can actually see what progress would have been made? Because by that stage, it would have been up and running for approximately a year, or bring it back on its anniversary.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor English, I'll call upon you when is the time.
Okay.
I was actually going to say from the chair, I think this is a standing item that will come back for regular review, so we have precisely that opportunity. But coming back to you, Councillor English, let's deal with that licensing thing, which I think you've moved with the appropriate words.
Yes, because this is a question about procedure actually being changed and licensing committee being consulted going forward. It's not about amending the document on the basis of comments.
Right. So we've got those words in place. Technically, that needs a seconder. Somebody else said exactly the same thing earlier, but Councillor Perry, are we all agreed that that is the way forwards? Right, that's agreed. Now to deal with the biodiversity report. We'd already picked up the action about just reviewing the no May thing, just to see that that's giving everything that we need it to. There are two things that I would like to raise in regard to this. First is a minor governance thing. There's an undertaking in that plan that every agenda will consider climate change and biodiversity in the cross-cutting issues and implications sheet with effect of this municipal year. And if you look at the agenda in front of you, there's only one on there that I spotted that actually mentions it. I think I'm right in saying there's some internal work going on as to how this is implemented. And perhaps I'll ask Mrs. Broom to explain that, but I would like us as a committee to insist that it is implemented, and you know, the commitment was this municipal year. Mrs. Broom. All right, Mr. Green then, perhaps.
Yes, I can confirm that although that isn't reflected in the papers in front of you, the relevant officers are looking at an appropriate format for incorporating comments on biodiversity and climate change implications, and that will come into effect from the next council meeting. So you will see this in future council and committee reports.
I'm going to push you on this. When you say the next council meeting, do you mean the next meeting of full council or the next committee meeting?
The next meeting of full council in July. So from then on, we'll be incorporating that in our reports.
I've got to say, I find that a little disappointing, but at least it's something by July. We'll leave that one at that. The other thing I really wanted to put into members' minds, I find this report a little bit misleading, perhaps in regard to local plan progress, because it cites on a number of occasions there's a policy coming in the local plan review that will fix this. And in the Regulation 18B, there are aspirational words that signal that, but that work is not as committed and progressed as to deliver the outcomes with certainty that perhaps one could be forgiven thinking is a certainty in reading this. And perhaps we'll come back to this later. I don't want to labour more, but perhaps to finish this item by saying that I hope that we take all of the principles of what we're trying to achieve forwards into every corner of this council, we're through every committee and every process to actually take actions to do it and not just talk about it aspirationally. Members, will you agree to note the report? Noted. Thank you. If I'm not getting in a muddle here, we're at item 17. Councillor Cox.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, we've got item 14, which was reports of outside bodies. Can I just raise something?
Technically, we can't go backwards on the agenda because we've dealt with that item.
But we were jumping, so I thought you had missed it.
No, we did cover that.
You did cover item 14?
Yes, there are no reports of outside bodies.
No, there aren't, but I would like to have asked a question about outside bodies.
If it's not a burner, can we
Very
put that...
quick.
I'll indulge you.
Thank you very much. Would it be possible, seeing as we have new members, council members, that the web page that tells everybody about the outside bodies is looked at and also shows which committees each outside body reports to, so that we can start to link up who from this committee or the reports to this committee. It's on there, but it's not complete and it doesn't tell the residents who does what. Thank you.
All right, noted. So we are at item 17. It's a discussion paper for our next steps forwards, recovery and renewal, particularly with hopefully a post-COVID tinge to it. And I'm going to ask the Chief Executive to get us started on this. Mrs. Brim.
Thank you very much, Leader, and good evening, members. So this report on recovery and renewal from the COVID-19 pandemic is, as the Leader has already said, for discussion and then hopefully for decision. Prior to its publication, there was a briefing for all members on the 9th of June, and we were really pleased to see so many people participate in that. And this was a place where key data was shared about the effects and the impact of the pandemic for our residents and businesses. More detailed information was subsequently circulated to all members, and links to this were also provided in the report that's in front of you this evening. As you will no doubt be aware, there is a wealth of information about the effects and impacts of the pandemic at a national level and at a local level, and about the opportunities for positive change and the risks and the threats too. All this produces a complex picture of interrelated and interdependent issues, not least of which is the relationship so clearly highlighted by the pandemic between economic health and public health. We've brought together a small fraction of the data and information available, focusing on our residents and the role of Maidstone Council in terms of our responsibility for the social, economic and environmental well-being of our residents in our place. We also need to be mindful that the effects and impacts will continue to be felt and further unfold over weeks, months and years ahead. So having begun to plan for recovery last June, but being interrupted to some degree by the second wave of the pandemic, and the need to focus again on our response through all of this and subsequent resurgence of the virus, I hope you'll agree that now is the time to focus on recovery and opportunities for renewal, and perhaps also community resilience for managing future emergencies. So there are two key areas for debate this evening. The first is the question of the Council's overall approach. National government encourage us all to embrace the concept of Build Back Better. They've produced information about what this means to them at a national level. So the question is, do you want to take a similar approach? What does Build Back Better mean in our local context? So section 3 of the report sets out the headlines from the government's principles. My question to you is, are these the right principles to guide our recovery and renewal actions? And if so, what do we mean when we say, for example, we want to achieve levelling up? It's important that we develop and express a clear and consistent understanding, and that we've shared that and we're all signed up to it, because this will shape our response efforts over the weeks and months ahead. The second question is around what actions we take to bring our recovery and renewal objectives and plans to life. So Appendix A describes some options. These are presented based on what the data tells us about the impacts from the pandemic, and they draw on the experience and expertise of staff across the council and the discussion that was held at the briefing I mentioned earlier. And our intention in presenting these is to stimulate discussion by the committee. Before I close, I'd just like to touch on what will happen following this evening's debate. Officers will take the outcomes and, alongside the information already available, develop a proposed prioritised programme of recovery and renewal pieces of work, along with a proposed allocation of resources. We will do this in consultation with the chairs and vice chairs of our service committees, and we will aim to present the outputs from this to the Policy and Resources Committee in July for decision. I'm happy to take any questions, and I look forward to hearing the debate. Thank you.
Thank you for your introduction. Councillor Harper was very quick off the mark to speak first.
Thank you, Chair. I work for a community group not based in Maidstone but based in London, just dealing with welfare and debt issues, and we've seen directly the impacts of COVID, and a lot of the points in this report in terms of the survey are reflected where we're based, and was, you know, so I think the impact of Maidstone isn't different particularly to the impact across the whole country. But what it does highlight, and I think one of the points the Chief Executive pointed out, issues around mental health, and I know that was raised at Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee last week about the impact of on mental health, not only of adults but also of pupils at primary and secondary education. So one of the issues I think we do need to think about is what we can do as a council to help address issues of loneliness and of mental health of our residents. The economy clearly is going to be one of the main keys to getting us moving forward. And again, the Economic Regeneration, Martin and I have been looking with the officers and members of the committee over the last year on how our economic development strategy will drive us forward and help our economy to recover from COVID. So I think we need to obviously see the synergies there when we're looking at a programme of work going forward. But if we are to look at things such as community resilience and levelling up in whatever sense that means, I think we do need to do work looking at where we have areas of endemic poverty in the borough, because those communities tend to be some of the worst affected by COVID. But interestingly, in addition obviously to the areas we're aware about, which is the Shepway area and Parkwood and High Street, we've also seen indicators of poverty and stress in terms of universal credit claimant counts going up in places such as Fan, where I represent, which haven't traditionally been seen as areas of I suppose, endemic deprivation. But there are other issues playing into those sorts of things. So all of that needs to be looked at, if I think, research done if we are to drive an element of levelling up, which I think we do need to do to improve the life experiences of those communities. But that's a long piece of work. So perhaps over the next year, we may wish to look at what's necessary. But if we're actually to be serious about levelling up, it's a multi-decade, multi-generational exercise to be done with sustained commitment from this council. One I think we need to do, but I think we need to go into it recognising it's not just a 10-minute jargon. To address the issues, you know, is a long-term thing. But it's, if we want to have resilience in our communities, we need to do it. And coming on to community resilience, I would also, and I see in the report, pick up on the fact that some of our communities in the borough already are, in a sense, more resilient than others. So, for instance, where we have parishes, you have a parish council, and they tend to be quite close to their communities. Now, in the urban area, which is where most of our population lives, we don't have parish councils. And the number of community groups and the areas they cover are pretty patchy. I mean, let's all be honest. The town councils of us here know that most of our areas are probably not covered by community groups and residents' associations. And I think if we are to try to build up that level of community resilience in the town population, we need to do work which is, again, referenced here in terms of, you know, getting an infrastructure of community groups. And there's a role for us as a council and councillors in our wards to work with residents to try to build up those sort of community groups and that you know, residents' associations and so on. And I'm sure most of us, again, from the town areas have been involved in that. But to get these groups going, you do need an element of pump priming and support. And I think, again, perhaps that's an area where the local authority could look to support people. And I know there's references, again, to pump priming. I mean, I've scribbled down some ideas this evening of how we could do that. But hopefully you've got the thrust of where I'm coming from, and I think we do need to do work on that. And I would welcome the chance to have further discussions with the Chief Executive around that, you know, outside of the meeting. Okay, thank you.
So if I was really trying to summarise your key points there, commitment to levelling up and work to be done on community resilience. Yeah. Councillor Cox, I think you were next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This was a document that was obviously going to be quite full and covering lots of bases. From the briefing, I thought there was an awful lot of input. I thought it was very good to see a lot of councillors there. We then went back, I'm sure, to speak to members within our group. I wonder if, when we look at this, or when we now pass this back over to officers, we've got the three areas that have sort of risen to the top of the project ideas: economic recovery, community resilience, and the way indeed we work as a council. I wonder if I could start by seeing if people think this is a reasonable way. When we're looking at the funding for this, would it be appropriate to look at spending percentages in these three areas and to sort of have a minded then to see, say, 50% going towards the economic recovery within the borough, community resilience, 35%, and the way we work, using maybe 15% of funding that we receive, leaving aside the Welcome Back Fund that we've seen through Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee, the way we're going to be looking at spending the 153,000 there. I think that if I was going to be saying from these projects that have been muted here, I think some of them cross-pollinate almost, and they join together. But I think the environment, building back greener, I'm trying to cross the two things, retraining of adults and gaining access to employment, I think would be another key point for us. The community voluntary sector, which Councillor Harper has spoken about, I think there are two areas there that we can support them with, maybe funding, maybe facilitating or admin. Focus on the life chances with health and how we present and direct people or offer people the ability to get better health and access to those sorts of facilities. I think if I was going to say that the top thing for me was thinking about local business community and thinking that residents of Maidstone, when they want to buy something, when they want to achieve a service, buy a product, let's encourage them to think local and to look locally first. I heard people speak about butchers. Going and looking at the butchers locally is a fantastic way to support your community where you live, rural or anywhere. So if I was going to encapsulate everything I'm thinking here, I don't discount Build Back Better. I know that's a government thing, but if we could tag with that, think local, I think that would be a brilliant way to look at most things that we're going to try and to achieve here. So I hope I've covered a bit of finance, what I think are the 5 things that I would like to see championed and progressed. But if we can talk more about the percentage idea of how money is spent, I do think that the health recovery, and interestingly, talking about economic health recovery and public, they're two things. Lastly, what are we responsible for as a council? What do we think we have to do? And I think we've got to work closely with what KCC, who have the same problem, because they have a pot of money, and knowing where they're going to spend it, I think we obviously need to work in parallel with them. Thank you.
I think I had Councillor Cook next, and then coming down to Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from Councillor Cox's point there, I think it's absolutely essential that we adopt a joined-up position with all of the services that are working with the communities, whether that be residents' association, whether it be the voluntary sector, whether it be KCC, and including the police and the other services. I think that there needs to be some level of sort of cross fertilisation of those ideas in that sense to get the message across. Personally, one of the things that I think is for me the most important thing in all of this is looking at that area that I think that has the greatest potential to be the longest term problem arising out of this, and that is the impact that the pandemic has had on our young people. And I don't want to get into specific age, but you know, clearly we've got we need to talk to the schools as well in terms of what they are doing specifically. It breaks my heart to see the stories that are coming out regarding Amazon and laptops and infrastructure that could be used just being binned, which is the most crazy thing I think I've ever come across. I do get slightly concerned when we talk about the way we work in terms of an inevitable progression to more sustained home working. I think in part the movement to home working is causing some of the mental health issues. I think there is a great benefit of actually home is home and work is work, and when you start to blend those two things together, you know, that creates a level of confusion. Now I think there are opportunities to do that, but I do think that maybe we need to look at doing that in a flexi time sort of way, so that there is that we maintain this distinction between home and work, because I think, you know, you've got to, when you leave work and go home, the idea is to leave work behind you and go back to a place of refuge, hopefully surrounded by people that work with that. I think the community resilience aspect on this is incredibly important, and it goes back to the work that the community's already been doing. And I think we have a huge debt to thank people that have just come forward in a very proactive way and operated brilliantly throughout the last 18 months. My last comment that I'd like to make on that is a subgroup that I feel, again, very strongly about, and I think they are sometimes taken a little bit too much for granted, and that is home carers, where you know, and the support that they get, that without them, the burden that then goes back on the more regular services is huge. And within that environment of home carers, there are young home carers as well. And Mrs. Broom, if we could find somewhere in what we're doing to do something that provides a measure of support for them, I think that would be really good. And I agree with the comments about looking at some of our more deprived areas, and I think that if we can blend that and prioritise that in those ways, both geographically and the other bits that I've just been talking about, I'd be very interested to see the report that comes back. So, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Round.
Thank you very much, Chair. Much of what I've been wanting to say is probably fairly long. Unfortunately, a number of other members have already mentioned some of my points, but Councillor Cook has certainly mentioned a couple of points which I think are particularly crucial and critical over this period. I personally think that the older generation have actually dealt with COVID far better than the younger generation have. They've adjusted, they're far more used to trials and tribulations, whereas it's come as a great shock to many of the younger people. And they are indeed the ones that have suffered, and they are indeed the ones that have been trapped in boxes for many months and found it a very difficult time for themselves. And as a result, it's hardly surprising that not only their education has suffered, but certainly themselves culturally and socially have suffered. And I really do think that youth is a priority in whatever we do. Any project that we do at the moment has to be some form of pump priming. We have to push it into priorities. And almost like biodiversity, I think across the work of Maidstone Borough Council, it covers just about every single facet we do, both corporately and what we do in every committee. I mean, obviously I wear the chair's hat of economic regeneration and leisure now. And I think that obviously economic recovery is critical. And I think the town centre and revitalising that is a very important part, because everybody's going to benefit as well as youth from that. But so indeed are all the high streets in our main rural service centres, because we do have some idle children, let's say, that should have better things to do at times. And when people talk about children, they tend to forget that we have a youth culture as much as a children's culture. They are very, very different. And we're not, I don't think we're addressing the youth culture as well as we can, whereas we might be addressing children's culture. Another point I really wanted to make is that if you go to many estate agents, they'll tell you here and now that people who want a house is actually slightly different to what was wanted 3-4 years ago. Yeah, they want roofs over their house. Everybody wants a roof and a house. That we all want the basics of a roof over our heads, and we want food in our stomachs. But now estate agents are saying that people want more access to bigger and better open spaces. They preferably want bigger gardens. They'd like bigger rooms, of course, as well. But they'd like for their children and their elder people more access to the fresh air. Back to biodiversity again. But I'm going to just give one word, and it's maybe something, since we have the chair of SBI here, one word that's pretty critical that nobody ever seems to mention: allotments. I think allotments can be really beneficial for health, for enjoyment, for people growing their own food. It's certainly something that can benefit anybody, anywhere. So I'd just like to chuck in that keyword, allotments, but think certainly, yes, we must prime community activity, youth, and indeed carers. And those are some of my priorities, but there's plenty of other good words here, but I've said my bit.
Thank you. Is that Councillor Garton indicating?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. At 33, page 33, 2.1, the purpose of this report is to enable debate and establish a clear strategy and set of actions. Now, we certainly had a debate this evening, and I think a lot of valid points have been made. If the Chief Executive asks us for a clear strategy, I'm afraid there's so many cross-cutting issues on this whole subject that we mentioned a few tonight, and I think we gave through our debate some sort of guidance to the Chief Executive, not only tonight, but also at the briefing, the workshop we had a few weeks ago. So, in conclusion, I would say, first of all, thank you very much to Ms. Broom and all her teams for leading us very competently through the last 16 months. And there's, as I said, there's so many cross-cutting issues. For example, if we're looking at page 48, there's the theme of domestic abuse, pretty low on the scale, but very high on the scale of social isolation. And domestic abuse is part of social isolation and vice versa. If people say, well, my problem is social isolation, don't they mean domestic abuse as part of it? So as this is cross-cutting on the requirements and demands and the problems of people in this borough, our answer should be cross-cutting as well. We need to work with the other agencies. We need to work with KCC. We need to work with the local business community. And I think that's the guidance we've got to give to the executive team in this borough. We can't do things on our own. We need to work in teams.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Ring, I hadn't realised that your name card had fallen on the floor. I thought you were just waving at me. Carry on.
Okay, I haven't really been part of this because, well, this is my long time on this meeting. So I only went by the papers. And when I read it, it's my wish. Oh, all them words. You're all saying the right words to me. And then I break it down. Because regardless of what I think, every single one of us sit here and thinks about our own ward that we represent. Well, I can tell you now, if we're all going to thingy, look at, I live in the road that's got the highest in the whole of Maidstone of deprivation. I live in that road, so I think I know what I'm talking about. I'm also born there, and I'm also lived there, and I live with these people. Some of my people that I've been helping or been working with through this pandemic, they don't know what a business does. They go out with their £5 up the co-op, get their bread and the milk for the day, then go home. or I got it, or my husband got it, or he got their prescription, or I got their prescription. This is how we worked. We even did, when we could afford it, say, oh, don't worry about it, it's only a couple of quid. There ain't a business person I know that would say that to a resident if they went up there and bought the potatoes and everything. They go, yeah, sorry, love, it's £2. And they'd expect that £2. So what I'm saying is, we do work with these people. We work with them all the time. The health visitors, the doctors, they all know what's going on, but you can't keep throwing money. Sometimes it isn't the money, believe me. It's the time, it's the listening, having a laugh with them, because they get miserable enough. And why I'm telling you now that there are no residents' associations that ever last in our wards, because we get picked on for being grass to the police. That's the truth. People try, and then all of a sudden there's all the banging at the doors late at night. That's what we get. So you won't get a residents' association representing them. You might get them for a couple of weeks, and then they go away, because I've tried. I've started about 12 of them, and then they get threatened. But we don't even, we bring a policeman along, because there are genuine things that we're worried about. So all I'm saying is, that is a business plan. See, to me, that is a business plan, which is nice and good, and all the words that I'd like to hear. That ain't for the residents, because that doesn't mean anything to them. Means it to use, but not to them. So all I'm saying is, tonight I've heard someone, don't disrespect Gary, but turn around saying, I want so as carers going. Well, if I'd known we were coming along with a list, I've got an armful. So all I'm saying is, I would meet with the chief exec, like I normally do, and let her know what I know about what's going on in my ward. I hope every single one of you would have the same decency to do that. But as for business and that ain't going to get these people out of COVID. They've been knocked for 6. And we've got to greet them and say, it doesn't matter, we'll help you survive. Sorry, Chairman, but this really got me tonight.
It's interesting, isn't it? When an issue is really complex, and this isn't aimed at any one person, this is perhaps aimed at everybody, we make really long speeches. We talk about it, but the question is, I think, from the Chief Executive and others, give me the half a dozen priority actions you want to start taking tomorrow. So we really need to distill it down in those terms. Yeah. I'm going to just chuck in a couple of words. So if you take in that section 3... Sorry. When you do it, turn it so the paper folds me, because it's invisible at a certain angle. Right. I was just going to say, levelling up, yes, behind that completely. Community resilience isn't simple. You could throw a lot of money at it. We know we need it, but we do need to be very considered about that. Build back greener, that just should be a given in everything we do. Build back faster, but take care. I mean, we saw how doing things really fast can work out really well with cycle lanes in some places, didn't we? So let's get on and do things in a business-like, expedient manner, but don't cut corners. It says here, delivering a global vision for Britain. So yeah, let's have a global vision for Maidstone. Maidstone the business capital of Kent. Well, I'm already extending that to the business capital of the South East, but, you know, global Maidstone. And I do think we need to have a mentality in the borough to think local. I don't suggest that we start printing Maidstone pound notes, but a pound earned in Maidstone is best spent in Maidstone, and we should, in any way that we can, encourage that. And the way we work, well, it's not going to go back to how it was. So we must embrace the good bits, be careful about the dangerous bits, and strike the right balance. Councillor Mrs Blackmore, I apologise if your indication had been enduring for some time, but I didn't see it.
That's okay, Chairman. Clearly, I don't know how to indicate properly with my little doings, so I apologise for that. It's clearly much more complicated than I thought it was. I think a lot of this is quite interesting, but it's all a little bit loose. It's all very woolly, and the woolliness doesn't sit very well with me. I think somebody mentioned earlier about tying up all the threads into certain ideas, and the one thing that comes across to me is broadband. It's very clear the winners and the losers over the last 15 months, a lot of it has been linked with, do you have decent broadband or don't you? Where are the broadband black spots, etc., or no spots, or whatever you want to call them. I know we have done some work with KCC on broadband, but I think linked with flexible working and the choice of how we work, I love that phrase, agile working, I think that's so right. So not necessarily always in the office, not necessarily at home, but a little bit of choice. I think that flexibility is huge. And I don't know whether we can link up flexible working spaces in the economic development strategy as part of this agile working. What is it Maidstone Borough Council can do? Because I think for me, that's a key point. It links back to something. The Green Revolution, again, they're good words. What does it actually mean, the Green Industrial Revolution? I'm not quite sure. If somebody could put a bit more flesh on those bones, that would be helpful. I'd actually like to see continued progressive work with KCC, not pontificating. We have had quite a lot of pontificating before, but it's not necessarily constructive, and I'd love to see more constructive and progressive working with KCC, whether that's support with our local plan or support with our economic development strategy, or we're working together with them with broadband. I think it's only then we can actually start to deliver whatever the levelling up agenda is. Another thing I'd really like us to look at, possibly within the economic development strategy as well, is what's going to happen to the empty shops in the town centre. Can they be used for other purposes? You know, can they be used for, I don't know, residential or other options? And again, I think that's something we should be exploring. Could they be, you know, voluntary sector spaces? Could they be communal spaces for different sections of our communities to meet in? I don't know. It's a thought. You know, parishes have got parish halls. Some places have got local halls. Others haven't. Should we have a place in the town centre where one of the big shops has been? The answer is, I don't know. But I feel that we are the ones that should be pulling those threads together. So for me, I think it's broadband and flexible working. If you're going to have communities, then that needs to be third sector, MBC, KCC. And I think a bit more about the Green Industrial Revolution, because clearly there's some finance associated with that. What is it we can actually do to deliver that? And that's not just about capturing money and then looking at it. What can we do with that money? How can we really put the money to work? Because I think we're ever so good at pontificating, and Councillor Burton has already mentioned this. You know, we all get passionate and excitable, and that's probably because we haven't seen many humans for many, many months. But I think really we need to look at it sensibly and say, Let's not just have £1 earned and £1 spent in this borough. Let's turn that pound into £2 and then spend the £2 in the borough.
I will come back to you, Councillor Cox, but Councillor Pearl hasn't spoken yet. Councillor Pearl.
Chairman, the principles in section 3 of this report are fine. I agree with Councillor Blackmore that, like a lot of abstract principles, they are a bit woolly, but the alternatives, you can sort of call them inoffensive and common ground for a lot of people, I think. I also agree with you that the nuances are perhaps open to some, open to discussion. I do, however, think it would be better if we could sort of, move things along and get on to talking about the brass tacks, such as the broadband and so forth. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to move that we adopt the principles in section 3 of the report and ask the officers to consult the chairs and vice chairs of the service committees on detail, such as the appendix, before returning the matter to the committee.
We do have a seconder for that. Councillor Cox, you'd already indicated to speak, and then Councillor English.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to address what Councillor Ring was saying, because at the beginning of the pandemic, I think the first people to respond were neighbours, were communities, were streets. And then at the end of lockdown 1, members of staff on the screen in front of us here contacted all of these groups and said, how can things change another time? How could we help? How could we facilitate? Would it be better for you to have a chain of communication within the voluntary sector? And all of those things. So it doesn't take residents' associations to do this. I think it's almost, if we can communicate back down to street level, that is fantastic, because that's what they were doing through Facebook, through all of those things. They were doing that, and we just want to really understand how we can help read what they're doing and facilitate for the future. So I know a lot of communication has happened with all the voluntary sector, and therefore I think we do need to have a plan like this, and I think a lot of them do get it because they care, just the same as you do, I do, we do. But I believe they do get it, and they do see the benefit of having a structure, because people didn't realise that they could get delivered by post their medication, but that was a lot easier. Those sorts of things are more in place now. So I think we do need to consider, not just think of this as a business plan, it's a plan for every resident and every business and every partner that we're saying we need to speak with. So I do think it's important, and anybody who wants to speak to us about this, to you, then I think they should feel they are being included. So I don't think we should disclude or discount them. Thank you.
Councillor English.
Yes, I mean, my own ward is a bit of a mixture, High Street, with some quite well-off people and some rather poor people. It's very mixed, as people will know. What has been quite clear is that the amount of civil infrastructure which you might find in terms of community also varies a great deal across the area, and from very easy to work with because there are long established residents associations, to areas where not so much because people are threatened, well in some cases they are threatened, but not by criminal elements, but by uncooperative landlords who don't want to see their tenants involved in activities. But so there are many difficulties. Having said that, we as an organisation, as a local authority and as individual councillors and members of many other groups have a responsibility to try and address these things. This document here is a very, very worthwhile exercise in setting out goals and objectives, philosophies, underpinning those. But as Councillor Pole and others have said, what we need to do is to move on to the what are we going to do phrase, rather than we needed to do this, don't get me wrong, this is important work, but we do need to go on to what we are actually going to do to address some of these issues. Broadband in South Maidstone and elsewhere is very patchy at best, but certainly that's an issue to address. But there are many, many other issues, but what we need to, we can't split, we can't do 30 or 40 different things. What we have to do is identify the key 6 or 7 that we can actually make a difference in. So, yes, start with an additional consultation stage, but I'll just make a plea that that be as inclusive and as cross-party as possible, because I think we're all on the same page in trying to address these issues, and because, we represent a wide range of people, and it shouldn't just be, thought that the solutions are coming from one side of the house, because they're not. We all have the same objectives here, and we want to achieve the same outcomes.
I think that is important what you've just said there. So as we move this to the next stage, lest it appear to be not what you're asking for, I think it will be informed by this debate. But if any member of this council has further ideas and suggestions, lobby them through one of the chairmans of one of the committees. We're all in this together. Councillor Cook, and then we'll wrap this up.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I just wanted to come back on in terms of what we might see in July when the officers bring it back, which will obviously build in to what we've seen today, aspects of the debate, which I think on the whole has been good. What I'd also like to see, though, which hasn't been maybe mentioned, is what sort of outcomes are we targeting through this process? I think, to get away from the woolliness is that I think we need to understand what success in this area will look like in some sort of a time frame. And I think in that sense we give ourselves some strategic objectives, and I hope that we might have something in the report that would reflect that as well, Chairman.
Thank you. So, in writing the report that's in front of you this evening, there were lots of dilemmas about how much information to include and how much historical perspective to include. I very much appreciate that not everybody around the table this evening has been a councillor for the borough for very long. So just to fill in a little bit of information on the latter point about objectives and how do you measure and what will the success look like. We did look at some of that earlier in the calendar year, and the council adopted some key performance indicators around the economy and other measures. So we have gone through a little bit of that thinking already. No doubt it can be nuanced and flexed to reflect some of the debate this evening. But there were a couple of other points I just wanted to make in terms of what I'm hearing. I think you've said a lot about common purpose with other organisations. I think one thing that the pandemic has strengthened is working for a common purpose. We have engaged, when we're looking at recovery and renewal, with some of the key partners. So I've spoken to my counterpart at KCC, at Golding, at Mid-Kent College, with the police, and lots of other organisations. There is just such an appetite to work together. Working out what we do independently of one another and what we do together can quite often be the tricky bit of the conversation. So I'd just like to provide some reassurance that we are very much taking that approach. And I think within the report you'll see reference to what could be regarded as a bit of jargon, but around anchor institutions in our place. These are organisations that are not going to go away. They're here, they're invested, and we need to make the best and work together on generating and spending a Maidstone pound in our place. If we can make it 2, then so much better. But there's an amazing appetite for that. And I do think that that will spill over into employment for young people. If we work together on recruiting to the hospital, to the council, to Golding Homes through the same routes, and we recruit our own people from our own community to do those jobs. That might be a bit sort of, I don't know, aspirational thinking, but I think it's worth working towards as an objective that sort of binds us all together. And so I think what's ahead of us now is probably even more difficult than what we've done up until now. Prioritising that whole list of stuff, there's loads of good ideas. You've added some ideas, you've made the list longer. Prioritising it is going to be really, really, really difficult. So I just ask for your tolerance as we bring forward recommendations that are about that prioritisation, because I'm sure we won't get it right for everybody, but what we do have to do, as people have said, is do it at speed now so that we can get on and do some practical things. So we will do our absolute best to do that in as transparent way as we possibly can, so that you've got a report to, I don't know, pull apart and make decisions on in July. And just to add to what the leader has said, if there's stuff that you want to give us to incorporate into that thinking, please do so. But if you are going to do it, please can you do it quickly? Because there is an amount of work to be done between that comprehensive list and a prioritisation and then the report preparation. So, yeah, if it's possible to do that within, say, the next 5 working days, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. There is just one very specific economic recovery suggestion that I wanted to test with you all in case it may be worth taking it forwards. It's around employment. I mean, in the list we have mention in particular of youth employment, but employment is employment. You know, if we've employed the older person, that only leaves the younger person for the next job. So it's a holistic approach, but employment. I'm of the belief that there is a significant shortage of business premises in our borough, off-the-shelf business premises. As a council, we've allocated places. But believe me when I say when a business comes to Maidstone, it does not necessarily want to learn the planning process, engage an architect, appoint a contractor, see it all the way through a final fit out before oh, that's available, we could move in 6 months' time. That's what they want. So using the leverage of our capital programme, and I think there is some money in there around commercial investment, I wonder whether a piece of work specifically could be undertaken to validate the assumption that there is need for business premises and to consider how this council might use its capital to speculatively build, either with a short-term strategy to build, sell and exit, or maybe a long-term investment strategy, who knows. But I wonder if we could ask that to very specifically go on the list of something we can do to actually have some places for some companies to actually come and to bring some fresh jobs into our economy for young and old alike. So I think there were nods, so that's going to get tacked in there. Councillor Harper, and then we'll just conclude with the vote and move on.
Well, I'd like to second what you were just proposing, right. Chair. I think that's very important, but I think we also want officers to recognise we're not just talking about office employment, we're talking about engineering and industrial and, you know, all economic sectors, because one of the things which I know I've spoken with you in the past and we both agree on is making sure that companies, whatever sector they're in, have the ability to move through in terms of accommodation needs in the borough.
All right, I'm glad you stressed that point of not just offices, that, you know. Councillor Round, I really want to wind us up, but
I'll keep it very brief. I mean, already I'm having those conversations with John Foster, Economic Development Officer, and already today we've actually started discussing finalising the economic development strategy, and that subject and topic has occurred whilst the main thrust of the economic development strategy is ready to go, some of the key words may well be adjusted, and we'll be adopting policies around those areas.
Excellent. There was a motion that was seconded. It moves this piece of work forwards progressively. If I hear no dissent, can I consider that to be agreed? Is that agreed? Excellent. Thank you. Conscious that we've done just over 2 hours, would members like a 10-minute comfort break? I'm seeing at least one nod. 10-minute comfort break. So meeting adjourned for 10 minutes, strictly 10 minutes. We're about to reconvene, so if I can ask you to take your seats. Thank you. Yes, we're reconvened, and we're at agenda item 18. This is the update on the public sector-led garden community update. And prior to the report's introduction, the chairman of Lenham Parish Council, Councillor Britt, has asked to address the committee. So, Councillor Britt, are you with us on the web?
Good evening.
Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members, as a former local government officer, I've sometimes been called on to write a report that said nothing new. And that's exactly what you have in front of you here. This report has the same lack of detail that we and you have been hearing for the last 18 months, along the lines of, don't panic, we aren't there quite yet, but we will be soon. For example, paragraph 2.4 assures us that an agreement with the landowners will be available, quote, in the next few weeks. If I had time, I'd cite the number of reports over the last year and more to this committee and others which contain that assurance. In paragraph 2.7, we're told that, and again I quote, expert assessment and advice has been sought concerning a range of rail station options and further detailed traffic modelling, and that very detailed further work will be needed to progress from options to a preferred solution. And presumably that also includes raising in the region of £183 million, which apparently is the current cost for a new railway station. I understand the local planning authority's position is that Heathlands can only progress on the basis that a new station on the Ashford to Maidstone line is provided. That was also said of the High Speed 1 station and the new motorway junction, both of which have subsequently disappeared. As Highways Authority, KCC could only entertain a prospective additional housing allocation on the basis that capacity exists or can be made available on the existing network. The current position of KCC is that the 1,000 houses released at Lenham in the neighbourhood plan will put the complex of roundabouts at Junction 8 on the M20 at risk. How then can Maidstone Borough Council begin to consider whether or not Heathlands is viable and deliverable when the modelling for these key elements of work is yet to be completed and, more importantly, costed? What has been slipped into this report is that more public funds will be needed for, and I quote, a specialist company to assist with public engagement and consultation. Why, we should ask, would what we've been assured is a perfectly viable scheme need such specialist help? Be in no doubt, opinion from Hollingbourne to Charing and many points around and in between is quite against this proposal, and no amount of gussing up is likely to change that. It seems to us that the state of play which has been reached on the Borough Council's own project is far inferior to that which would be demanded from any other promoter of a proposal of these proportions. Does this imply then that the Borough Council has predetermined to support its own scheme regardless of whatever the technical conclusions or costs? So my questions to you are, why are you not requiring more detail in these reports? Why are you about to commission a PR company to put gloss on something which ought to stand as a planning proposition, not a PR-driven one? And when are you going to start to ask some more forensic questions rather than allowing another nothing new report to be nodded through? Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Britt. On behalf of the committee, I'll say that your comments are heard and noted. I'll now invite Mrs. Broom to introduce this report to us.
Thank you, Leader. And first of all, may I give William Cornwall's apologies for not being able to attend this evening. As some of you know, he's been quite unwell. Hence, I will be presenting the report. It is a short update, and we have presented it to be noted. It's the last in a long series of very regular, frequent updates to this committee. I beg to differ with what Councillor Britt said. in terms of the lack of content. It certainly is a succinct report, and what it tells you are three key things. Firstly, the collaboration agreement, which you considered in March in detail, has now been signed, and that's the collaboration agreement with Homes England. I think that is a significant step. This is an organisation that has thoroughly reviewed the Heathlands proposition and concluded that it is a viable and credible project to be pursued. Homes England is a government agency, and I don't think they would have entered into this collaboration agreement without being totally satisfied that it is viable and credible. Amongst other things, Homes England are now taking the lead role for securing the option agreement with the principal landowners, and the progress there is good. The heads of terms have been agreed, and we're confident that the whole agreement will be in place in the near future. Considerable progress has been made on the draft master plan, and that was raised in a question from the public earlier this evening. We did submit the further draft as the promoter of this scheme to the local planning authority at the end of March. And the planning authority have given very extensive feedback from the whole range of statutory consultees that they are obliged to engage with. That is exactly the same process being used for the other garden community currently part of the preferred spatial approach. So our team are systematically working through the feedback from those statutory consultees, and that's anything from archaeology to ecology to transport, the whole range of responses that you would expect. So a further submission going into more detail and responding to those points will be made to assist the planning authority in its assessment of and decision making on the preferred spatial option. The issue of the appointment of a specialist company to assist with engagement and providing information for the public has not been made because we think that the scheme isn't viable. It has been made because we think that that engagement is important and we want to have the right specialist expertise to assist with that. And I think, as the leader indicated earlier, timing on that is key. And so we hope to be able to embark on that later in the summer, and we've employed some specialists to assist us and Homes England. So don't forget, this is a partnership now between the two organisations going forward. So I'll leave things there. I'm happy to take questions if you have any, and also to listen to your feedback on the project as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two indications. Councillor Mrs. Blackmore. And, sorry, no, I'm going to go back to visiting members first. Councillors, Mr. and Mrs. Sams, would one or both of you like to speak at this point?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, before I start speaking, can I say that the echoing from speaking for the people asking questions is extremely irritating, and it really is very unnerving, and it's makes it very difficult to say anything. So my hat's off to what was said previously by the people asking the questions, but can I say hats off to you for being understanding that was a problem, so thank you. Anyway, good evening, councillors. Much has changed from the March P&R meeting, and the council control has changed fundamentally, and this committee is now an opportunity to take a different approach to the previous group. Last time, one Conservative member voted in favour, 4 Conservative members abstained, and save for one councillor, the rest voted for, and one councillor absented themselves. It was an unconvincing show of support for this proposal. One councillor said it leaves more questions than answers, and others stated this will be a substantial risk and we are undertaking. Are we building a plan without any foundations? Another councillor said on the £3 million shared cost with Homes England, said there is no huge financial loss either way then. And finally, another said it's like a high-stake poker game. With this level of debate and understanding, we are seriously concerned not only for the impact of the proposal on our residents and how this proposal impacts on everything else we are doing with regards to the local plan. Councillors, you have an opportunity tonight. This is not the way a council should be acting. The scrutiny appears virtually non-existent. Officers' reports are lacking detail and clarity we would have expected from such an initiative. Will the plan we see before us give the public an opportunity to question how this council operates? Please, look at what you are on behalf of this council are voting for. Take time to look at the detail. It appears that the councillors have little to say to scrutinise the content and hold officers to account. Since the last meeting, the enabled plan has received overwhelming community support. Questions are continually raised by residents and have been again tonight. The residents feel not listened to, and this is why freedom of information requests pile up in the council offices. Mr Chairman, you mentioned honest endeavours. With so much information unavailable and all the freedom of information requests to sit in the office, we cannot agree. This is a complete disaster, an unmitigated disaster, and unfortunately, instead of stopping the Heathlands train and seeing what it has to commend it, we have full throttle. When it comes to analysis, unfortunately, it will derail and take the local plan with it. Our suggestions to members would be go back to look at the detail, to scrutinise, to question, go back through what the facts are and the likelihood of success. Members, employing any amount of PR consultants won't wash with the inspector. Please, as a new committee, go away and really look at what you have created. We should be listening to members and officers' comments with interest. And finally, I have a question for the Chief Exec. Success the report is, details, Chief Exec, it is not. And finally, obviously you mentioned part of the team. I suppose that our team is, I was just wondering, what is our team? Because obviously you have got two roles to play with this regard. And I just wondered which team you were actually playing for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sams. Councillor Mrs Sams, do you also want to address the committee?
Yes, please, yes. I think, you know, I wrote some things down about hearing the same words, and obviously that's been said, you know, words such as productive dialogue, good progress, well progressed, and we've heard this all before, and there does seem very little detail. But I suppose the line seems to me that it's as though so much money has been spent, we mustn't stop, we must carry on regardless, even though the evidence is shouting not viable. And as has been pointed out before, KCC have said the 1,000 houses already agreed under the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan will overload those roundabouts. So what will 4,000 do? The agreement with the landowners is not done. The land is not available. At this moment, the land is not available. The technical data conclusions are being ignored. There's just so much detailed work needed on so many fronts. So much is not in place. So many unresolved issues. And the chairman, he said himself, when he answered a question, he said that the plan is not fully worked out. It is not, and absolutely right, it is not progressed enough. And if it went from another developer, it would not be where it is now. And I don't believe this is master planning. I believe it's public money being spent on a proposal pushed forward by Maidstone Borough Council for Maidstone Borough Council with a total disregard for the facts around. And I think it's slightly disingenuous to say that there's been full opportunity for members and parish councils to access the information. We have been denied every single step access to the information on Heathlands as ward members. I was going to ask about how much money's been spent, but that's already been answered. But I do find it ironic that it's almost the same amount that's been recently lost to Lenham through that development around Sill. And I suppose I would ask the same question members need to be critically curious. They need to ask more probing questions. And I'd agree, but why do we need a PR company? Why do we need glossy brochures to make it more palatable? Because it still doesn't change the unviability of the whole proposal. And at the risk of repeating myself again, which I've said before, if we continue to blindingly go down this ever-decreasing pathway, we risk the Maidstone local plan review. Heathlands will not float, it will sink the local plan. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs Sams. Returning to the members in the room now, Councillor Mrs Blackmore.
Thank you, Chairman. As Mrs Broom has said, it's a very succinct report, and I would like to recommend that the committee notes the report, but I'd like to just tinker with your recommendation, I'm afraid, to change it to that this committee notes the report and requests the next update in September 2021 to enable further progress in the information gathering to occur. I know previously we've asked for monthly updates, but I think at the moment, with the holiday season approaching, I'm trying to look at this from a pragmatic point of view, hence saying no report in July, let's go straight to September. But with all the reports, etc., that we've spoken about that are due to take place, that gives us 3 months and we have a further update in September. Hence the reason for that small change.
Councillor Pearl, to you.
I'd like to second Councillor Blackmore's point there. Question for the Chief Executive. I'm pleased to see the additional work that's being done on transport infrastructure at Para 27. Excuse me. And there's the reference to the submission subsequently being made to Network Rail concerning the technical case for various rail station options. Can I ask what sort of response has been received from Network Rail and sort of what sort of level of engagement we're getting from them?
We haven't had a detailed response from Network Rail. We have put forward to them a memorandum of understanding, the objective of which is to secure joint working on the station options. Now, there are a variety of options, and so we have engaged, as you might expect, some very specialist technical support in order to produce those options, and we have worked closely with our counterparts at KCC, and as far as I understand it, certainly within the technical team we have strong support as well. As I understand what you have said about maybe considering another update report in September. There are also other channels that obviously that we can communicate with the committee if there was any significant change in the period between now and September, and that might include Network Rail's position in terms of any response.
Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, I apologise if I'm speaking for myself, but this has been going on 18 months. Some of the information fed to this committee has been on yellow pages. I am new to this committee, and this is, in fact, an update. What I'm asking the chairman, can you arrange a complete overview of everything that has passed through this committee to the newer members so they're fully up to speed, including that's been issued on yellow pages? I apologise if it's just myself in that position.
I too am exactly the same boat as you, and I have been asking a lot of questions directly to fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge. So I know that option is available to you, Councillor Mumford, to come in and have a face-to-face briefing and receive that information and ask whatever questions that you would like to at that stage.
There was some nods around this room when I spoke. I wonder whether you need to organise a group. I don't know.
So what I would say then is if there are members in that situation, in the first instance, email me and we'll assess whether it's prudent to have a group, large, small, or how we move forwards. But we can organise that in the most expedient manner. It is vital that we all know the background. And whilst speaking, my assessment of where we're at with this, and I'm looking at it for the first time from this side of the Chinese wall, there is a lot of confidence, but it now needs to crystallise into certainty. Now, that's not to say that that predetermines a decision that we may or may not make in the future, but we're at the stage now where the concepts need to become certainties, and I think the next period of time will be very telling. So I don't have a problem at all with what is suggested as the motion. If you would be willing to accept a minor amendment that if there is significant news, that an earlier report will be brought. But other than that, the next stage will be quite decisive in identifying whether there is truly an option or not. But I have seen that there is a lot of very solid work going on, and the might of Homes England is not to be underestimated. Councillor Garton.
Just two questions, please, regarding the points raised by the Parish Council Chair and I believe Councillor Sams. The first one, the Parish Council Chair, Mr. Burt, said initially we had the plan of a motorway exit and that is now gone by the by. Is that the case? Because I remember when this first came to this committee, we were talking about the motorway exit, and I welcome that we are talking to Network Rail on the train station. I think these two things were going hand in hand when the garden proposal was first tabled in this committee. The second question is, Councillor Sams made a connection between SIL money and money being spent on this project. Surely SIL money is not being spent on this project. It's a different budget. Could we have that please confirmed?
Mrs. Broom, would you like to come back on those?
I certainly can. So on the last point, no, we're not spending SIL money on this project. You can see in our budget reports a clear identification of resources through the capital programme for expenditure on this project, and the source is not SIL. In terms of the motorway junction, so the issue of a motorway junction on this stretch of motorway is now firmly in the remit of the local plan, and not specifically this project. And the reason for that is that the scale of development which triggers Highways England engagement is beyond the scale of this development on its own. So that's why we're looking at the corridor of the M20 and the cumulative effects of a range of different developments along that corridor. So I think we've mentioned this now on several occasions, that that is the strategy. So the responsibility, if you like, the thing that is going to produce the potential of a motorway junction is not the public sector-led garden community on its own. I hope that helps to clarify.
And Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this has been around a long time, and let me say straight away, I agree with the proposal to note, and I certainly support Councillor Blackwell's amendment. So let me say straight away that the thing that makes me nervous in this still is when I see a Network Rail, because I've had dealings with Network Rail, and they're not the easiest organisation to work with. I'll be perfectly frank about it. This 2.7 doesn't, how shall I put it? It's a little bit vague, it seems to me still. And so in reporting back and looking at this, I want a lot of emphasis on this station, because at the moment, Network Rail's involvement seems to be just a little bit vague to me when I read this. It's not terribly definite. And without the railway station, this project is much weakened, it seems to me. And we started off with a motorway junction, and as the parish council chairman is absolutely right, we've gradually moved down the scale. And so I am a little bit nervous of what we're ending up with. So I do support the proposal, but, and it's a big but when it comes back in September, I want a bit more definite statement about the position of the railway station. Thank you.
Okay. Having observed other schemes such as this elsewhere in the country, if this turns into certainty, I think we'll look back and say, wow, that was really quick for one of these schemes. You know, these are 10, 15-year planning cycles before the first shovel goes in the ground. But until the next stage reveals itself, we will have to wait and see. And I feel for the residents that are sitting there, will it, won't it, maybe, maybe not. We need to get to that certainty stage, one way or another, for or against, as quickly as possible. Councillor Harper, last word, and then we'll conclude with a vote.
I would welcome, I think, a briefing on this, because I don't know much of the background, but I'm just on paragraph 2.7. I think I agree with what John said about dealing with Network Rail. They work on very long time scales, and whether we get, you know, I suspect we'll end up making decisions before we know from Network Rail where they are. But I just wondered if we'd been discussing it also with bus providers as well, because, you know, putting on new bus services is a relatively, well, it's a lot easier than building railway stations, I would suggest, or motorway junctions. And if we have a reasonable sized development here, one access route could be by, you know, by buses, for instance. So I don't know what discussion has been had with the local bus companies over this proposal.
I don't think we'll go way into this, but my take on that is I certainly don't think we're into the territory of dumbing this down even further, if that's how some people would perceive it as a bus-based solution. But buses will be part of any new development anywhere that we consider having viable bus routes, you know, whether it's, you know, town centre developments, whether it's on the edge of Maidstone, that will be there. And I know a lot of work is being done on the traffic modelling to see the viability and the feasibility of all of those approaches. Members, the motion is quite clear to note, and the request for further report and update. Is that agreed? Thank you. So next we were going to take agenda item 20, which is the reference from the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee. When I instigated such a thing, I didn't imagine I'd be on the receiving end of it. So I kind of know what's coming, but I'll invite the now chairman of the SPI committee perhaps to address us and give some explanation. Councillor Cooper, if you would be kind enough.
Thank you for indulging me, Mr. Chairman. I'll make it as brief as I can. As I'm sure we're all aware, the local plan review so far has focused predominantly on spatial policies. And I think there is wide agreement now that we are in a position, hopefully we're in a position where we will move that forward. Something that has caused a lot of consternation with the planning committee at Maidstone Borough Council, with members of the council, and certainly members of the public, is the lack of certain and particularly updated spatial policies. Now, quite clearly, this is needed. We owe it to the people who have sent us here to represent them, to ensure that we do have some sound spatial policies going forward. However, to achieve that, complex work does need to be commissioned to give us better control of various regulations. We're not going to be able to roll non-spatial policies into this local plan review. To do so would be pretty foolhardy. It would mean that we would tack policies on, which likely wouldn't get past the inspector. So what we are proposing to, or what I would like us to do, is to get a separate document which has got a number of non-spatial policies to sit alongside the local plan review. Now, I'm fully aware, and I'm sure everyone in this room is, that there are some upcoming, quite significant planning changes. So any work that we do has to have longevity. We can't simply get a non-spatial document together which will only see us through the next 3 years. We need to do some serious work to get some serious policies in that work for members of the community that we are here to represent. So any work that we do going forwards must tick a lot of boxes so that we can use this document in the future to guide our non-spatial policies. Getting this right, however, is going to require extra spend. Quite frankly, I don't see any way that we can do this without getting extra members on our team, presumably consultants in. What I would therefore ask this committee is that they might consider some extra spending to the local plan review budget going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing that. I won't say anything at the moment, but I'll let Councillor English go first.
There may be various ways of skinning a cat, and I'm not wedded necessarily to the wording that came from SPY, but the fact of the matter is that we all know that when we did the current local plan, we were promised that this was a rapid thing to do to get the housing numbers, and that we would address all of the things that were missing in this local plan review. Now, because of various things, and I'm not blaming anyone, we are in a position where we haven't addressed those things, and we have basically a document that is not about very much other than housing again. Now, we are where we are, and apportioning blame for that will get us nowhere. But the fact of the matter is we do need to actually start having some planning policies in this borough to give planning committee and other parts of this council the ability to actually plan proactively rather than just react and produce you know, the bare numbers and nothing in terms of quality. So there are different ways of achieving this, but I think that the view that you took previously and Councillor Cooper took is essentially the view I still take, that we need to achieve this somehow. I'm flexible about how, but we need to achieve this, because if we don't achieve it, we will be still talking about this in 5, 10, 15 years' time and wondering why we built yet more shoddy housing in Maidstone, which and it's not just about housing, of course, it's economic development too, and green spaces, and why we haven't got any, because we didn't provide the policies for them. So please try and find a way that, if it isn't exactly what the SPY reference said, finds the way to develop these policies, because these non-spatial policies, because we really do need to do this for the people of Maidstone.
I think the key words that Councillor Cooper did use is the additional resources to actually get it done. And this is the committee that can signal the support for that. I'm not going to say too much more now. I've got an indication for Councillor Pearl, then I'll go Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chairman. I certainly agree with both Councillor Cooper and Councillor English on this point about the need for sort of enhanced non-spatial policies. And as I often say, it's bad enough we build so many. It's even worse that some of them, frankly, are just crap, to put it mildly. Or some of the windfall, so-called windfall sites are so badly put together. And I could also mention other things as well, such as sort of the number of garden grabbing applications I see in my end of town, or indeed the one that doesn't contribute to housing targets at all, the process of HMOification that goes on in Bridge and Fant wards, for example. What I'd like to do, Chairman, is I would like to move that perhaps we earmark a figure for this task, so that sort of some work can at least begin. And to that end, I would move that we earmark, I pick the number out of the air, £140,000 for this purpose. Maybe I could have a seconder.
An array of hands went up to second that. That was almost like the vote. But can I say that, shall we take that into our next item? As I think, because I mean, if we want to at this item, resolve that we make the decision to find a way to deploy the extra resource, perhaps to the order of what you've suggested, and then maybe in our next item we've got the context to deliver on that. So
we could do it that way. Alternatively, we could just move, as I've just suggested there, then come the next item, we can move what's on the papers, subject to accommodating what we've just resolved previously.
Okay, would you just give me your wording again, just so that I've got it, if it's to hand?
Right, I believe it was that we earmark a figure of £140,000 for this task, so that the work can begin.
So, would you mind if we changed it that we find a way to respond to the need initially of £140,000?
Yes.
Right, excellent. And there is a seconder or two around on that basis? Look, Councillor English, are there any others that want to speak on this item? So I think I'd said Harper, then I'll come back to Councillor Cox, if I may.
I would support the fact that we need to find additional money, and actually I'll be moving an amendment on our next agenda item, which includes a reference to allocating some of the underspend on the need for the strategic planning thing, which I'll move when we start that item. And I think it's been made clear that we need these other strategic policies to go with the local plan. I think you yourself, Chair, in your old role, used to say, look, the strategic plan is more than just about housing and housing numbers. It's about building a whole borough, a holistic view. And so without the work for that, the local plan really doesn't deliver the goods.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think Councillor Pearl took his own words out of the air. I'll just grab a figure of £140,000. I'd like to hear how we intend to spend that money and on what. So I'd like to hear a proposal of what we need to get, the number of policies we need, the amount of money those policies are going to actually cost, and then we've got something before us, or else we might just as well decide to go less money, more money, double the money? You know, let's not just grab figures out of the air. You said it yourself, Councillor Pearl. Let's grab a figure out of the air, £140,000. I'd rather know what that money is proposed for. That's the sort of thing that comes before this committee. We need to know the detail of what we're going to agree to spend money on. I'm not disagreeing that if we need to have these, we need to know what we've already got, what we've already done the work on, what's still amiss, and how much that's going to cost to do. I'd like to see those figures before we actually vote on anything. Thank you.
I think it's interesting to observe that it's in line with the sum of money that was specifically requested of this committee on a previous occasion, regrettably rejected under the previous regime. I think that we should conclude this item and move on to the next item. Councillor Mumford, I'm going to let you have the very last word on it, and then we will vote and move on.
I was going to come in similar to Councillor Cox. I think after spending 7 years working on the planning committee with missing policies and the frustration of that, I think we need all the policies that the officers dictate to us. So I think that the proposition should be something similar, that we will look for ways of funding the required non-spatial policies as dictated by the planning department or whoever.
So, right, your suggestion for wording it is subtly quite different. I think we're all going to end up at the same point that we want to be. We could go through the process of considering that an amendment that might turn into a substantive motion. It's not committal at this stage because we haven't found the money yet. So I think we could put the detail and the safeguards in at the next stage. So if you want to go through the process of suggesting that formally as an amendment, I will of course do that. Or can we just move this and then get into the nitty-gritty of money? Your choice, Councillor.
I'm just very concerned that we're going to go in with a figure that is not sufficient to supply the outcome. So, yeah, I'd like to go for amendment that I think the proposition is that we find means of achieving the 140,000. I would rather go in that we find means to find the money that would support the non-spatial, the development of the non-spatial policies. I don't want the 140 on it.
Councillor Pearl, would you take that amendment that at this stage we resolve to find an allocation of money sufficient?
Would you like me to?
I think we could move on very quickly if we did that.
Yes, I'll accept the amendment.
And your seconder is content? Right. Okay. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. Right. Let's now move into, I think it's 19 on the agenda, which is the fourth quarter finance performance and risk monitoring report. And Mr. Green would probably get us under starters orders here.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll cover the finance and performance parts of this, and Russell Heppelston will come in when I've finished and talk about the risk side of it. So far as financial performance is concerned, you'll remember, members of the committee who were here last year, that we had significant financial pressures arising from COVID-19. But what's happened, and this is illustrated in the chart, which is at table 1 on page 64, is that the government, during the course of last year, has been increasingly generous with the grant support that they provided to local authorities which is excellent news for us, but we didn't know that at the beginning of the year. And so what's happened is that we've had the benefit of government grant support, and the support that I'm referring to here is unring-fenced government grant. We've had grants for a whole lot of other things as well. But also the council itself, particularly early in the year when we didn't know that we were going to get all that grant support, took quite a few mitigating measures to guard against the risk of us overspending. So the effect of that, and again this is illustrated in the report on page 64 and in the second table, is that we had additional pressures, 1.7 million of additional costs, 4.8 million of lost income. That's actually been more than offset by government grant and by the mitigating measures we've taken ourselves. So incredibly almost, because we weren't expecting this this time last year, we've come up with a 1.2 million underspend for the last financial year, which is good news, but I would emphasise that that's very much a one-off. It doesn't indicate that the underlying financial position is any better. If anything, the longer-term effects of COVID-19 may mean that our financial position will be worse, certainly for a period of time. For example, we're yet to see parking income recover fully to the levels that it was at before COVID-19. But we're in a position, and these are still draft figures, but we're in a position at this stage to report an underspend of 1.2 million, and as was suggested on the previous item, that gives us a number of options which are spelt out in the report. The default position is that we simply transfer that 1.2 million underspend to general fund reserves. We could use it to fund a capital programme, we could use it for a range of other things. The recommendation in front of you, and obviously I'm aware from what's been said that that may be amended, but the recommendations in front of you is that the underspend is transferred to reserves, and that doesn't prejudice future decisions of this committee as to what it might choose to do with the underspend. We've still got a healthy level of reserves, so that money could be available if members wish to spend some or all of it for other purposes. So that's the position so far as the revenue account for last year is concerned. I won't go into detail on the rest, but the report covers the capital budget, where we underspent again last year. Part of that was a deliberate slowdown in the capital programme. The report also covers tax collection, the reserves position, treasury management, and Maidstone property holdings. And on the specific point that SPY committee asked to address, which is regular reporting of the local plan position, on page 80 of the report, it provides up-to-date information on expenditure on the local plan review, so the latest figures for April and May, and also indicates that notwithstanding what's been said about additional monies being spent on the local plan review, the service will be aiming to work within the budget that was set for the current financial year for the local plan review. So that's the financial appendix to this report. The next appendix deals with performance indicators, and of the 3 strategic PIs for last year, unfortunately 2 of the 3 were missed. The first one that was missed dealt with the housing relief duty, where in retrospect it may be that our target of 60 days was over 60% was over ambitious, but as the report spells out, it's not quite as bad as it appears, because after the relief duty period ends, then the council is liable under the general housing duty, so it doesn't mean that people who met the criteria weren't being housed. The other strategic PI which was missed was about resident satisfaction, and this was based on a November 2020 survey, and it may be that COVID-19 and everything to do with that led to satisfaction levels being lower than they had been the previous year. Those were the strategic PIs. The report also talks about the various service PIs, of which there were 8 that were missed by more than 10%. And 4 of those adverse variances really can be put down to the pandemic, things like footfall in the town centre. So unfortunately not a particularly strong position on PIs, although some actually performed better than the previous year and better than target, but it was an abnormal year, as everybody I'm sure will recognise. If maybe we can leave questions to the end, and I can hand over to Russell Heppleston now just to deal with the risk element.
Please do.
Good evening, members, and thank you, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
A little bit of an echo, but that's fine. Thank you very much. This report is the Q4 report for risk. And really what we summarise in this report is the outcomes from our risk management framework. So that is the process that we have in place to identify threats to the achievement of our service delivery and our objectives. I'll just talk very briefly about a couple of points. Firstly, on page 116 is a summary of our ongoing effort to create a more coherent approach to risk. So this is about understanding risk at each of the different levels of the organisation. So we've heard tonight around recovery and renewal, and the Chief Exec spoke about, well, what are the threats to those objectives. Well, this is very much our approach to starting to create a much more cohesive approach to that. So what this report will do in future will show risks at those levels from the strategic level, and also our corporate themes and the operational risk level. If I move on to the corporate risk profile, we have maintained the same profile in our corporate risks, and that's largely because there's been no significant changes to the threats that we face over the last few months. So we continue to keep our eye on things like the impact of COVID-19, things like financial restrictions, and also those high-level risks around really what we're seeing out there in the economy and the retail and leisure sectors. So it's about keeping our eyes on those top 11 issues. So we have maintained them as being risks to us at the corporate level. What this report does include that it didn't include previously is an update on our operational risk profile. So from page 119 onwards, it summarises the outcome of our effort over January and March to completely revise and refresh operational risks. So those are risks to our day-to-day service delivery that our managers and our heads of service maintain. So on there we do have a top 5 operational risks, and I'll just provide a quick update on page 122. There's 3 risks there around business rates, collection rates, and grants processing by our revenues and benefits team, which very much was sitting at probably the highest level that we have on the risk matrix, and that was because of likelihood. Basically, these were issues that they were certainly facing, but they had uncertain impacts in the future. What has happened, they've been reduced over the last couple of months as we've seen data come through on the Q1 activity in that service, and they actually have reduced quite significantly down to that kind of amber line. Obviously we'll provide more details at the next report, but it's just evidence to show that actually the risk response that we're taking for these risks, that we're starting to see the impact, and also you can see the exposure of those risks reducing as we start to get data through, more up-to-date data through on activity. The final page just gives a summary of how we're continually looking to advance and develop the risk management process, and then the final part of the report includes, in the normal way, the full detailed risk register for the corporate risks. Happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. No visiting members on this one, so open to the floor, and Councillor Harper was the first to indicate. I detected some excitement. I hope you don't think the mythical money tree has come back to life, but the floor is yours.
I'd like to move an amendment to the recommendations. And the amendment is that the following items of expenditure be funded from the Council's 2020 to 2021 underspend. One, £152,000 to restore the revenue savings to Maidstone Museum. Two, £180,000 to reinstate for 3 years the members' community grant scheme. Three, £300,000 to be spent over 3 years to revitalise the cultural sector and to enable it to help revitalise the town centre economy, working with strategic partners such as Parkwood Leisure. 4, £200,000 to augment the resources available to the strategic planning team to enable a local plan review process to be adequately funded. And 5, up to £150,000 to enable work on the conservation area management plans to be progressed and completed. Now, in moving that, I note that the underspend is a one-off, and all those proposals I'm suggesting are one-off proposals, which would help boost our economy and boost the services as we move out of the pandemic into a recovery stage, and actually would help to repay to our communities and to the council the benefits of the constraints put in place in the last financial year to deliver that underspend. As Councillor Blackmore earlier said, we need to make sure that we're putting our money to work. And I think when you look at our reserves, which is referred to on page 94, a reserves level of £32 million is currently greater than our annual budget. Our annual net budget is only £21.3 million, yet we're currently sitting on reserves of £32 million. To put a further £1.2 million into those reserves, to me, would seem immoral at a time when there are great needs out there in the borough, and we can use this as a one-off injection. We've seen reports previously in terms of the Hazlitt Theatre, for example, which shows the economic benefit of investment into our cultural sector and how each pound invested generates a large multiple of that in return. And that is why I'm suggesting £300,000 over 3 years into the cultural economy, because that will help generate a multiple factor of well over £1 to £2 million into the town centre economy. And you working with partners such as Parkwood Leisure at the Hazlitt Theatre would seem a way of achieving that. The £200,000 I mentioned for the strategic plan is a direct take-out of the report we had from the local plan, where it's referring to an additional £200,000 required for the current financial year. I so move.
Simple question. Is there a seconder for that? Let's just see, first of all, is there a seconder for that? Right, okay. Your motion fails to move on. For the sake of a starting point, Councillor Cox, I'm going to start with you and work around the room in a clockwise manner.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I got to about £920,000. I was adding up there. I don't know where I got to. This is a question for Mr. Green. We've talked about putting this underspend into the reserves. Am I completely incorrect? Did we not say we were going to use some of the reserves, or has that been already worked out through the figures you're showing us here? So I thought we were using some reserves, and therefore, do we need to put them back, or are the figures you're showing us here of the underspend of 1.222, does that include us replacing that money anyway? in reserves?
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I think you're referring to the fact that we anticipated that to balance the budget in 21-22, we would have to take money out of reserves. So that has already been allowed for in the medium-term financial strategy. So the 1.2 million is in addition to that.
If we use the money that you've told us the government have given us, how long have they said that's got to last us? Because let's say we have, hope not, if we have a fourth wave or a third wave or whatever, it comes back. Are the government going to turn around and say, I'm sorry, we gave you that money and it's supposed to last till 2023, 22? Is there any criteria that they've given that to us based on, please?
The money that's reflected in last year's figures was unring-fenced grant for 2021, and so there's no risk of us having to pay it back to government. What the government has also done is give us money for 21-22 of 860,000 for COVID-19 pressures in the current financial year, and that doesn't feature at all in these figures because, of course, this is looking back to 2021. Certainly the expectation with the 860,000 is that it will be used for COVID-19 response or recovery measures, and so that gives us a bit of firepower when we come to do the kind of things that were outlined in the Chief Executive's report earlier. I think that the more general point to make, though, is that we don't know what the government's going to do after the existing COVID-19 funding has been used up. The government has fortunately been very generous to local, or relatively generous to local authorities over the past 18 months, but there's a sense from some of the things that government ministers are saying is that that's your lot, and in future it's back to quite hard lines. So for that reason, we definitely need to maintain a level of reserves, and so there is a judgment to make about what that level of reserves should be, and certainly absolutely the safest thing to do would just be to take the 1.2 million and put them in reserves to bolster them in the future. And maybe, Councillor Cox, if I may pick up on reserves, because Councillor Harper made a comment about 30 million of reserves, and in fact, if you look at page 94 of the report, you'll see that the figure of 30, well, it's actually 31.82 million, that includes an item which is described as funding for future collection fund deficits. And what that is, it's a quirk of local authority accounting where we bring in the income that we've had from government to compensate us for lost business rates in 2021, but we have to account through the collection fund for those lost business rates in 21-22. So that 13 million is money that will reverse out. So the true figure for reserves, both general unallocated and earmarked, is 18.2 million, which is the figure at the bottom of the table on page 94. I thought I'd just clarify that so members know what the reserves position is.
That was very useful. Can we move on to Councillor English?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, there is a better outcome than we might have been anticipating at some point. However, getting wildly enthusiastic and rushing off to spend nearly £1 million, I think the figure was, that was recently suggested, might have been a little rash. that's not to say I didn't agree with a lot of the comments that were actually suggested, and I particularly think it would be wise, if we could, to actually move on and do some more of the conservation area management plans and strategies. We've done more in the last year than we've done in the previous decade, and it is making a difference. However, I think it is always rash to rush to judgment. So I think what I'm saying is that we don't have to decide irrevocably that we're going to spend the reserves now or not. In fact, we can make a decision to proceed with caution. On terms of the previous debate, the reason I supported it to a large extent was because when we had the previous discussion, I was assured by Mr. Green that we would be able to deploy sufficient resources from the reserves to actually support that work. And looking at the underspend, I'm being reasonably adept at arithmetic. I was assuming that this would be a way of meeting that promise that was made to P&R when we discussed that previously. So I don't think it was an inconsistent thing for me to have said. I still believe that we should proceed. I've got no problem whatsoever with trying to bottom that out and coming forward with a robust plan, as Councillor Cox has suggested, of exactly what that money should be spent on. That would be wise and prudent. I don't think anyone would I hope no one would disagree with that. So in a way, it would perhaps be best if, as the amendment that we discussed earlier, identified that we want to see the work done rather than putting a pin in the paper and saying that's the exact amount that should be spent. It might be that we actually have to spend a little bit more than that. I do understand where the figure originally came from, of course, and slightly mischievous, Councillor Pearl, in a way, but I understand where you came from with that. So I hope we can proceed to actually move that forward. In terms of the other proposals Councillor Harper mentioned, maybe we can come back to discuss what else we do with some of the underspend when things become clearer later in the year, and we would not necessarily say we wouldn't do some, at least, of those things, or other things in due course.
I think we're on the same wavelength here. I think the recommendation is quite carefully crafted in as much as it says we put it in the piggy bank, but it is available to us with due consideration wherever we see as appropriate as events unfold. I think, and I'm going to take the bull by the horns here, in the particular matter of the local plan non-spatial policy work, it is something that has been debated at length amongst us all at different committees, planning committee, spy committee. I think the idea of 140,000 emanated from a spy recommendation, and it might well be a starting point. It may need more. It would be lovely to think it needs less. Now, I think the reason we're actually teasing this apart tonight is because members have been doing work with officers to say, well, how do we move this forwards? And there was perhaps a suggestion that we do need, well, let's have a report from Spy that says this is precisely what we need, and then that would come to us for consideration. Well, the moment I heard that that report might be available in September, and then they would think about it, and then it would come to us, when it is in actual fact a matter that I believe that we have all quite rightly set a trajectory and an intent on, I think it is appropriate to release an initial sum of money, perhaps the £140,000, and I think it should carry some safeguard. And because what I'm thinking is if it means that, well, to do this work we need to do a recruitment, get somebody in, or place a contract with a consultant, let's get on, because that's going to take time in its own right. you know, let alone waiting for a report and then starting that process. And lo and behold, it'll be, you know, sometime next year, the local plan will be through and we'll be being told, well, let's do it in the next review. No, let's get on and do it now. So, you know, if we earmarked 140,000 to be used by the interim director for spatial planning, probably not quite the right title there, but Philip Coyne is leading that, in consultation with the chair and the vice chair of SPI, so that there is also a member hand on this. There is the possibility to actually initiate the first pieces of work as immediately as is possible. So I think we should frame those words in those very specific terms. A sum of money up to £140,000 to be made available for the non-spatial planning policy development work, to be overseen by the interim director in conjunction with the chair and vice chair of SPI. So I will put that as a motion on the table now. I think I see an immediate seconder for it. But I think the general principle of what we have tonight is we have an underspend, but it's not really an underspend, it's an underdo, because for very valid reasons, there were lots of things that didn't get done. And we put it in the piggy bank, and then we carefully consider future projects one by one with a bit of substance. So I think that's where we're at. No more indications there. Not seeing anything there, which possibly means we can move to a vote. Councillor Pearl.
Apologies, Chairman. Are you moving the
I've moved that
recommendation? And the rest
and,
of the recommendation?
Yes, in the context of what's on the papers. Yeah, so the recommendation per the papers with the immediate application of the 140,000 as I've just described. There is an indication over there. It might have been an old one, but if somebody wants to speak, now is your chance. Councillor Perry, do you want to have a quick chip in?
We were just on one or two other issues on the paper, but I'm happy with what you're proposing. So if you want to go to the vote now, I'm very happy for that. Yeah.
Sorry, let's do that. We'll move to the vote on that. Deal with that business. Is that agreed, members? No dissent. Right. Councillor Perry, is it a comment you wanted to make in the context of the report?
Yeah, there are one or 2 points on it. I mean, I was just curious. It was on page 80, actually, and this always makes me nervous whenever I see it. And it's the capitalisation of revenue costs. It always makes me nervous whenever I see it in any... as an auditor, I always used to do a double take when I used to look at this, because it can be a dangerous road to go down. I know why you've done it, and I understand it, but what I'd like to get some reassurance is that this is not something you would be normal practice to do, because particularly an organisation like this is still essentially a cash-based organisation, and if you capitalise revenue costs, you've still got to spend the cash. It's as simple as that. So I think I'm a little nervous of that, and I would like some reassurance on that. The second point is on page 85, the virements that you highlight. You say they're all temporary, and that's something could you just elaborate a little bit on that, why they are temporary virements, which just slightly surprised me. And this one final point, and it's on the KPIs, and this may be just me personally, but when I look at the littering on the public highway, and we got 98% as the target, I don't want to see any litter on the public highway. I can think of countries in Europe who would be horrified if they thought that 2% was allowed as littering on the public highway, and I don't see why it should be in this. Our target should be 100%, surely. Thank you.
Very valid comments. If I can address the first one, which is your concern about capitalisation of revenue costs, well, that's in the jurisdiction of this committee and for our interrogation of future budgets and proposals that are brought to us. So we'll keep an eye on that and only do it when we're happy. On the last point about the litter, I think we agree with you. And, you know, there is some work being done through Chi that might bring us some future attack there. And the clever bit about temporary vehemence, Mr. Green.
Yes, I can answer that very quickly. When we talk about temporary environments there, it's referring to the fact that these are all one-off items. A permanent environment would be to change the budget on a permanent basis. So, for example, permanently increasing the amount of spend on planning by 100,000. All of these things are just one-off items. That's what's meant when it says temporary.
That's great. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I get the point. Thank you.
Excellent. Members, I think that does conclude our business for this evening. I'd like to thank you all for your attention over a lengthy meeting, and thank you to the officers for assisting us throughout. And I can... No, we don't. I declare the meeting closed.